Chapter 1129. If one ignored the fact that Su Bei had breached Shanwan City and forced Su Fei to his death, how many people would be moved by his words? His cousin's family had only one orphan daughter left, and Su Bei had helped out and raised her. What a good person. Su Bei had no choice but to do so. Qing Yuan had stabbed him twice and he couldn't retaliate. Naturally, he had to think of a way to salvage the situation. Su Yanxiao was already 11 years old this year. If she was raised well for 2 years and married into a good family, Su Bei's infamy as a murderer would lessen. After all, who would treat their brother's daughter well and love her as if she was their own daughter after killing their brother? When it came to public opinion, if one manipulated it well, one could turn black into white. It all depended on one's mouth. Qing Yuan smiled helplessly. I can't decide on this matter alone. I need to ask for Mrs. Su's opinion. Su Bei's expression was ugly as he smiled in agreement. Of course. Qing Yuan had mercilessly toyed with Su Bei. This had already made him want to kill him, but he suppressed it in the end. When two armies fought, they didn't kill the envoys. The war hadn't officially started yet. If they casually killed the envoys, things would get even more out of hand. Even though Su Bei was fuming, Qing Yuan still came and left in one piece. Before he left, Qing Yuan nodded slightly in a certain direction with a faint smile on his lips. Unlike the perfect and proper expression he had when facing Su Bei, this smile was more sincere and warm. After Qing Yuan left, the tent fell silent. The officials didn't dare to make a sound, afraid of provoking bad luck. In order to ease the atmosphere and regain some face, Su Bei praised Qing Yuan against his will. He sighed. I don't know how Lu Shi managed to recruit so many young talents. That envoy just now wasn't simple. Qing Yuan had pointed at the mulberry tree and scolded the locust tree at the locust tree. He had tried to force him to give his son to a dead person, but he was still magnanimous enough to forgive him. Not only was he not angry, he even praised him. It could be seen how broad-minded he was. Just as Su Bei had thought, his actions had indeed earned him a good impression of him. Han Yu said, Qing Yuan? You remembers where I've heard of him before. Strategists were a bunch of monsters. Their memory was terrifyingly good. Han Yu quickly found the relevant memories. Before Han Yu could speak, Cheng Sun took the initiative to confess. The military advisor has an outstanding memory. Qing Yuan is Sun's second brother. Being exposed by others and confessing by oneself were different in sequence, and the results were also different. If it was the former, it would inevitably arouse the suspicion of those in power and put them in a passive position. If it was the latter, it would appear that he was magnanimous and would eliminate the Lord's suspicion. Qing Sun was a smart person. He naturally knew what was best for him. Han Yu said, Yes, I heard Gong Luo mention it before. Patrol Officer Cheng said, My younger brother is insolent and has offended the Lord. Please punish him, Lord. Regardless of whether it was right or wrong, he had to take the blame first. In any case, Su Bei wouldn't really vent his anger on him. Gong Luo's younger brother is actually from the Orchid Pavilion. What a coincidence. Su Bei smiled, easing the stagnant and heavy atmosphere. I'm just lamenting the wonders of fate. I have absolutely no intention of blaming Gong Luo. After this incident, Cheng Sun had increased his presence and favorability in front of Su Bei. If Su Bei had listened to Cheng Sun's advice back then, he wouldn't be in such a passive state right now. How could Qing Yuan's visit be for the sake of greeting or delivering a letter? He was clearly here to collect a debt. He abruptly exposed Su Bei's crime of forcing his brother to his death. Then he further exposed the fact that his brother's bloodline had ended because of him. The most extreme was to adopt an heir. Asking Su Bei to adopt his own son to his mortal enemy, and the brother that he had personally forced to his death, was simply disgusting. From beginning to end, Qing Yuan maintained his gentlemanly demeanor. However, every word he said was heart-wrenching. Cheng Sun almost didn't recognize this younger brother of his. Although they had been apart for many years and his younger brother had grown from a youth with baby fat to a mature and steady youth, but this change was too big. If not for the fact that Qing Yuan's facial features hadn't changed much, Cheng Sun might not have recognized him at first glance. Su Bei dismissed everyone, leaving only Han Yu and Cheng Sun behind. He said with a bitter expression, I know I shouldn't have disobeyed the two of you. Now that we've reached this point, is there any way to salvage the situation? He had chosen his lord and had to support him even if he had to kneel. Han Yu didn't say anything. He felt that there was no need to think about salvaging the situation. They should just prepare for war and start at any time. Cheng Sun, on the other hand, doted on his lord. Su Bei's previous actions made him sad. Now that they were close and trusted each other, he was overjoyed. He completely forgot about their previous disagreements. Sun, I have a plan. It might work. Cheng Sun secretly glanced at Han Yu. When he saw that Han Yu didn't look displeased, he mustered up his courage and said, "My lord, why don't you write a secret letter to Lu Shi and tell him the pros and cons? If the two families fight, it will only benefit others." There was no need to say who this others was. The three most powerful feudal lords in Dongqing were Jiang Pingji, Huang Song, and Su Bei. Although Yang Tao still occupied half of Zhangzhou, he had already developed his foundation in Nanxing. It was a joy to expand his territory, so he wasn't included. If Su Bei and Lu Shi fought, Huang Song would definitely be happy to see it happen. He might even secretly stab them in the back. Su Bei said, "What Gong Luo means is that I should take the initiative to shake hands with Lanting and make peace?" Cheng Sun said, "Huang Song has disagreements with her, but my lord is indebted to her. Why don't the two families work together to kill Huang Song first?" Su Bei frowned and said, "I'll try." Han Yu didn't think so. If Jiang Pingji really wanted to kill Huang Song first, she would have done so in Sangzhou. She must have thought it through carefully before choosing to make things difficult for Su Bei. Why would she change her mind just because of a secret letter from Su Bei? How was this different from changing orders all the time? He thought that this urgent letter would take at least half a month to reach Jiang Pingji, but in reality, it only took 10 days. It wasn't that the letter was delivered quickly, but that the messenger met Jiang Pingji halfway. She gathered 100,000 troops and led them to the south. When the messenger saw this battle formation, his scalp went numb. Whose letter is it? Jiang Pingji didn't wear her casual clothes for long. After resting for a while, she put on her armor. There was an exquisite black sword in its scabbard at her waist. The origin of this sword was mysterious. The audience in the streaming room had never seen her pull it out. They were curious at first, but they forgot about it after a while. Qiguan Rang fanned himself lightly and smiled. "I believe in Zhao Gong." Feng Jin took over Qiguan Rang's job and managed Chongzhou. He also assisted Sun Wen in managing Beizhou, northern borderline. Before he could be happy for 2 days, he was dragged to the battlefield by Jiang Pingji. "Qiguan Rang, I believe in Zhao Gong?" Jiang Pingji had a sour expression on her face. "Su Bei is Su Bei. Why are you calling me male and female?" Qiguan Rang, if he didn't know that his lord had studied in Langyi for 3 years, he would have doubted her education just by hearing these vulgar words. What, male and female? These are honorifics. He thought that his lord had learned from Yuan Jing and must have a good opinion. He didn't expect her to say such vulgar words. This was his lord. He had to support her even while kneeling. "I definitely can't stand people calling me Lanting Duke." At this time, a bunch of comments floated in the streaming room. "If I don't call you Lanting Duke, should I call you Lanting Mother?" If they weren't separated by dimensions, Jiang Pingji really wanted to beat up this group of idiots. Jiang Pingji opened the secret letter and read 10 lines at a glance. "What? Su Bei wants to form an alliance with me and share the world?" Qiguan Rang said. "He's asking for peace and stalling for time." Jiang Pingji picked up her brush and wrote a reply in one breath. Her brush moved like a dragon and snake. The letter was very short. There were only a few words. Chapter 1130. I want 100% of the 9 states and 4 seas. After Jiang Pingji finished writing, she took a step back and admired her handwriting. Before she could rejoice, the group of viewers who were not afraid of being beaten by her started to make trouble again. "Lang Yuntian, I'll set up a famous flag for you. I want 99% of the 7 countries." A blue bullet screen was sent, followed by a similar red bullet screen. The viewers from both dimensions looked at each other. It turned out that not only were their dimensions' cultures similar, but even their animations were the same. "Mu Xining, streamer, do you want to consider changing your words?" The last person who said that died in Qin's dungeon. "Xinyuan Miao Miao, #picknose. I don't think there's a need to change it. Master Han wants 99% of the 7 countries, but Emperor Shi Huang wants 100. If it's really a flag, the streamer should follow Emperor Shi Huang's example and unify the world. I have to say, Master Han, you died a terrible death." The audience loved to use the streaming room as a place to exchange gossip. They could talk about anything. After their complaints, the topic changed from, "the streamer set up a flag," to "can the male protagonist of the anime not die?" After years of living together, Jiang Pingji had long understood the character of this group of people. She simply treated the bullet screen as air. She did not avoid Qiguan Rang when she wrote so he could see what was written in the letter. Even though he knew Jiang Pingji's ambition, when he suddenly saw the 8 words, the arrogance and confidence that came rushing at him still slightly surprised him. "Lord," an inexplicable emotion welled up, and Qiguanrang felt something stuck in his throat, making him unable to spit out additional words. "What? Are you so shocked that you can't speak?" Jiang Pingji laughed. "Or do you think I'm too arrogant and arrogant?" Qiguanrang came back to his senses, but he was not in a hurry to explain. Just as Jiang Pingji knew that Qiguanrang understood her, Qiguanrang also knew that she understood him and would not easily misunderstand or be angry. "I was shocked, but when the shock passed it made me feel like it was just as I expected." Qiguanrang frowned deeply and suddenly changed his words. "No, it's not enough. My lord's heart seems to be not only focused on the world, but behind it is a broader domain. The world is vast and the universe is boundless. The so-called 9 provinces and 4 seas may just be a drop in the ocean." Jiang Pingji's eyes were smiling, and her expression was full of deep meaning. "If we jump out of this fence we might really be able to find that place. If there comes a day I really want to go there again." Qiguanrang noticed that she was getting more and more mysterious, so he took the initiative to change the topic. One could not blame him for making a fuss over nothing. Since ancient times, how many emperors had been obsessed with longevity and alchemy, yearning for the boundless world of myths and legends? Reality proved that none of them could live forever. Instead, they died earlier than anyone else. Qiguanrang did not want his lord to lose her mind and foolishly follow the path of her ancestors. Jiang Pingji sensed his intention and laughed involuntarily. She put down the brush in her hand and took out an incense burner to dry the ink. Then, she folded the letter neatly and placed it back into the envelope, summoning the messenger that Su Bei had sent. If Su Bei were to receive this letter, he would fly into a rage. He would be so angry that he wouldn't be able to swallow his food. Jiang Pingji's eyes were filled with mischief. The contents of the letter were the ambition in her heart, but at the same time, it was also a method she used to deliberately provoke Su Bei. The other party eagerly sent a messenger over, trying to turn hostility into friendship. The two families were the strongest allies, conquering the world together. In the end, she gave him a tight slap without saying a word. The feudal lords all cared about their reputations. Jiang Pingji's action of slapping them in the face was really unkind. Those who were narrow-minded would be angered to the point of death by her. Qiguanrang could not help but laugh. Suddenly he felt some sympathy for Su Bei. Meeting such an opponent, perhaps they had a feud in their previous lives. "As long as my lord likes it." Qiguanrang's tone was calm, but his eyes carried a hint of undisguised helplessness and amusement. She sent someone to deliver the letter to the messenger. Wei Xi was outside the tent, requesting an audience. Zixiao is even more punctual than the sundial. Qiguanrang mentally calculated the approximate time. He stood up and smiled. "I will take my leave first." He was rather perceptive and tactfully gave the two of them some space. Wei Xi turned to the side and watched Qiguanrang leave. Their gazes met in the air and they quickly separated. Like a gentle breeze blowing through the green water, after ripples appeared, it quietly returned to a peaceful state. Qiguanrang was wary of Wei Xi, but he was completely loyal to his lord. For the time being, there was nothing suspicious about him. "Zixiao is stalking us again?" Jiang Pingji's words had a double meaning. On one hand, she teased him about whether he was jealous of Qiguanrang. On the other hand, she teased him about the timing of feeding her 3 meals. Wei Xi carried a box of food in his hands. Even though it was tightly covered, one could smell the appetizing aroma of food when they got closer. "Wen Zheng is too indulgent towards my lord. I can't be at ease." Wei Xi put down the box of food and brought out a few steaming hot plates of food. "The way to keep in good health is to persevere. If you are always hungry and full, your appetite won't be good when you're older. It will affect your lifespan." Wei Xi avoided the main point and dwelled on the trivial, avoiding Jiang Pingji's teasing. "How old am I?" "You're already thinking about how to keep in good health after I'm 70 or 80. Wei Xi glanced at Jiang Pingji and said mercilessly, "My lord is so unrestrained. Even 50 years is in danger." In her previous life, the emperor did not celebrate his 51st birthday in the end. Jiang Pingji felt as if a knife had pierced her heart. She begged for mercy. All right. I'll eat my meals on time, okay? I'll definitely keep you company until I'm 70 or 80. She was shameless, but Wei Xi was a little embarrassed. He didn't forget to tease her even when he was eating. He was also mentally tired. Little did he know that this was just child's play. There was someone more mentally tired than Wei Xi. Su Bei stabilized the troops on Qin Gong's side while he anxiously waited for Jiang Pingji's reply. Following Han Yu's suggestion, Su Bei also made a backup plan. If Jiang Pengji was willing to accept the suggestion of forming an alliance to conquer the world, that would be the best. Both sides could conveniently bury the hatchet and turn hostility into friendship. If Jiang Pengji was unwilling to accept this suggestion, both sides were destined to fight. Su Bei also had to make adequate preparations for battle. However, he could afford to wait, but Su Fei could not. Su Fei was a direct descendant of the Su family. He was middle-aged, yet he was forced by his cousin to hang himself and leave no descendants. This was already extremely tragic. They couldn't possibly let his corpse rot in the coffin and not be buried, could they? At this point, another problem arose. A filial son had to throw a basin to be buried. Su Fei's sons were all dead. Where would he get a son? Was he really going to let Su Fei adopt his son? Su Bei was 10,000 times unwilling. In the end, he could only choose a compromise. It still disgusted Su Bei to no end. He pinched his nose and welcomed the coffins of Su Fei and the others. With Qin Gong's help, Su Yanxiao carefully collected the corpses of her parents and siblings. 2 large and 5 small coffins, 7 coffins. She was the only one left of the large family that had been in constant conflict not long ago. Su Yanxiao, who was already thin and dressed in plain hemp clothing, was now so haggard that it was scary. "You don't have to worry about me going back?" Su Yanxiao was Su Fei's only remaining eldest daughter. She definitely could not be absent from the burial of her deceased parents. However, the Su family's land was in Zhe County. If she returned to Zhe County, she would no longer have freedom. Chapter 1131. In ancient times, people matured and became sensible at an early age. At the age of 11, one could already be considered half an adult. Su Yanxiao had always been intelligent. At the age of 6, she had been learning how to manage the inner courtyard from her mother. She had seen too much internal strife and intrigue within the inner courtyard. Her mind could not be measured by the standards of an ordinary 11-year-old girl. She knew her situation. Her eldest uncle was the main culprit behind her father's death. Her mother had also been indirectly forced to her death. In short, Su Bei was not only her eldest uncle, but also the enemy who killed her parents. Who would feel at ease letting an enemy take care of them? Su Yanxiao had the same worries. Qin Gong sat upright and looked at the young girl in mourning clothes in front of him. His heart was filled with hesitation. Xan Zhao Gong would not dare to mistreat you. If something were to happen, he would do his best to protect you. Su Yanxiao's pale face showed some mockery. Would he do his best to protect me, the enemy who killed my parents? You are now equivalent to his reputation. How would Xan Zhao Gong dare not protect you? Qin Gong said. If he can't even take care of your father's only daughter properly and something happens to you, not to mention the world, even the Su clan elders will not let him off. Su Yanxiao hung her head. Her exposed hands were so thin that only bones remained. They were like a pair of shriveled chicken claws. How could they still be as slender and smooth as when she played the zither or painted? She clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into the flesh of her palms, leaving deep red crescent marks. But, Qin Fengjing. Su Yanxiao held it in for a long while before finally speaking the words in her heart. But I'm afraid. Qin Gong did not interrupt. The scene of that day flashed before Su Yanxiao's eyes. Her thin body trembled uncontrollably. She thought she could endure it, but in the dead of night, her nightmare was filled with the sinister smiles of thugs. They surrounded her and her mother, separating them violently. They tore off their clothes as they beat them. Her mother died with her eyes wide open. The corners of her eyes split open due to the force, and the blood that flowed out dried up. She saw the scene of her mother being humiliated through the gaps of the thugs. The thugs did not let her off. She was more desperate in her dream than in reality. She struggled to wake up, but the thugs treated her even more cruelly. In the second half of the dream, the thugs had all turned into murderous ghosts. Each of them had lost their scalps, revealing their bloody skulls. Dirty blood was dripping from their crotches. One by one they crawled toward Lin Sanjiu, shouting deadly curses. If not for Su Yanxiao's strong state of mind, she would have been driven mad by the dream. After waking up from the dream, she couldn't help but let her imagination run wild. She even had a frightening thought. Why didn't Qin Gong arrive in time? If they had arrived 2 to 4 hours earlier, all the tragedies could have been prevented. Why didn't he come earlier or later? Why did he have to come after everyone had died? Su Yanxiao's rationality told her that such a thought was too ungrateful, but she couldn't restrain herself. When she regained her senses, she felt that she was like a devil. Her face was even uglier than the concubines in her father's backyard. Qin Gong was silent for a moment, then he said in a low voice, "What is Madame Su afraid of? Can you be honest with me?" "I've always felt that. I'm afraid that I'm destined to wander from place to place." Su Yanxiao smiled faintly. "No matter how well Su Bei treats me, can he treat me better than his own daughter? Although I'm a girl, I know that the world is in chaos. The feudal lords are greedy people. How can they be satisfied with what they have now? If I go to Su Bei's side, how many years can I live in peace? Or a few months? In the end, when the enemy attacks the city, I'll be abducted by thugs? When that time comes, will there be another Qin Fengjing in the world who will arrive in time to save me? Was this the fate of all women in this chaotic world? As a woman, should she accept such a helpless fate? She had no choice but to compromise and break her proud and unyielding character in order to survive in this chaotic world? Finally, Su Yanxiao hesitated but still asked him, "Why did you arrive late that day?" Qin Gong lowered his head and told her the truth. He didn't rush over that day to save Su Yanxiao. He came for Su Fei's corpse. If not for heaven's eyes, Su Yanxiao would have been there. He didn't know when he would have found her. "I'm asking." Su Yanxiao took a deep breath and enunciated each word clearly. "Why did the army arrive at Shanqing so late?" Qin Gong's eyes revealed a trace of confusion. "I've already said it." He never thought of suspecting Jiang Pingji, much less Su Fei. But Su Yanxiao was different. "I want to know why Lu Shi would be so generous to borrow 10,000 troops? Why did he borrow 10,000 troops and arrive at such a coincidental time? If there were too many coincidences, it would inevitably arouse suspicion. 10,000 troops were like cabbages. How could he borrow them just like that? Qin Gong was her father's most loyal official. Why would he switch sides at the last minute? Why did the 10,000 troops rush to Shanqing at such a good time? Su Yanxiao had been busy keeping vigil for her deceased parents. The temporary mourning hall was empty and quiet. She couldn't help but think too much. These doubts were like her nightmares, strangling her in a death grip. Qin Gong didn't hide anything and told her in detail what he knew. In the end, he added dejectedly, "I'm sorry. I'm ashamed to have lived up to your trust and nurturing." Su Yanxiao listened and didn't speak for a long time. "Lady Su, please be at ease for a while. Stay in Zhe County and quietly wait for good news." Qin Gong seemed a little shy. He looked away and said in a low voice, "Looking at the situation of the world, my lord and Duke Xinjiao will definitely fight. On the day the army defeats the enemy, I will take you away." Su Yanxiao didn't reply. Qin Gong kept vigil with her for a while, then got up to train the troops and patrol. Because he had to prevent Su Bei from sending troops to attack, he had been very busy. But Qin Gong couldn't stop worrying about Su Yanxiao. In order to take care of both, he could only shorten his sleep and rest time. Just as he left the morning hall, he found Yang Si standing outside. "Military advisor Yang, what are you? Tomorrow is the deadline. Lady Su has to carry the remains of your lord and the others back." Yang Si smiled bitterly. "I've admired your lord for a long time, but I can't send your soul off. Since I'm free, I wanted to come over and offer some incense to your lord to express my sincerity." Qin Gong was grateful. His favorable impression of Yang Si climbed to a whole new level. Unbeknownst to him, such kind words were nothing more than pleasantries for a strategist. As soon as Qin Gong left, Yang Si entered the morning hall. The temporarily arranged morning hall was very simple and crude. The air inside was a little stuffy, and it was a little uncomfortable to stay for too long. Yang Si said a few words of comfort to Su Yanxiao. When he was offering incense, Su Yanxiao asked him, "How long have you been listening outside?" Yang Si said, "Quite a long time." Su Yanxiao frowned. "Don't you know that you shouldn't listen to indecent things?" Yang Si said, "Lady Su, please take pity on Colonel Qin." Yang Si said, "Lady Su, please pity Colonel Qin." "What do you mean by that?" Su Yanxiao was a little afraid of men. When she saw Yang Si turn to look at her, she subconsciously shrank back a step. "Lady Su, do you know why my lord lent 10,000 troops to Colonel Qin? Did Colonel Qin join the lord's camp?" Yang Si suddenly smiled faintly and said to Su Fei's coffin, "Because your lord used Colonel Qin as a bargaining chip to exchange for these 10,000 troops. The journey from Wanzhou to Hu County is so long that even a horse wouldn't be able to make it in time. If he could make it in time that day, the entire army would be exhausted." Su Yanxiao's eyes widened in shock. She was so frightened that she took a step back. "Father, actually." Chapter 1132. No matter how smart Su Yanxiao was, she was still young. How could she be Yang Si's opponent? With just a few words, Yang Si had already grasped Su Yanxiao's weakness and completely controlled the right to speak. This matter, does he know? Su Yanxiao recalled what she had just said and thought. For a moment she was ashamed and didn't know what to do. Naturally, Commandant Qin doesn't know. Yang Si smiled and said, Lady Su, why don't you put yourself in his shoes and think about it? If you were Ling Wengong, would you let Commandant Qin know how he borrowed these 10,000 soldiers? According to Colonel Qin's temperament, if Ling Wengong hadn't schemed against him in secret, how could he have switched sides? Colonel Qin also said that he wished he could imitate his father and brothers and fight to the last drop of blood for his former master, Ling Wengong. The more loyal Qin Gong was, the more sinister Su Fei's schemes were. Whether it was Qin Gong or the Qin Consortium, they didn't owe Su Fei or the Su Consortium anything. His father and brothers had all died in battle, and Qin Gong was unknowingly sold off by Su Fei for a high price in exchange for 10,000 reinforcements. If Su Fei hadn't gone crazy and attacked first, Su Fei's wishful thinking would have succeeded long ago. He would have even brought his entire family to safety. Now that he had fallen to such a state, he couldn't blame anyone. He could only blame himself for not having enough luck even though he had calculated everything. Yang Si had a sense of propriety. Lieutenant Qin has been extremely benevolent to Lady Su, don't you think so? Su Yanxiao lowered her eyes in disappointment. She looked at the coffins in the morning hall with a blank expression. After a long while, Su Yanxiao asked Yang Si softly, Will Sir tell him about this? I'm not a talkative person. Why would I publicize this matter? Yang Si said, However, there's no such thing as an impenetrable wall in this world. If Commandant Qin found out from somewhere or if he figured it out himself, who knew? However, by that time, Colonel Qin would have already accepted reality and wouldn't have given up on himself just because his old master had abandoned him. My master Lu Shi is very open-minded. Colonel Qin is talented and she will cherish you. Su Yanxiao heard a trace of resentment and contempt from Yang Si's words. Qin Gong was talented and loyal, which master wouldn't like him? However, Su Fei had lied to Qin Gong and tricked him into going to Wanzhou, using him as a bargaining chip in exchange for 10,000 reinforcements. How could this be called cherishing? Su Yanxiao smiled bitterly and said hesitantly, Thank you, sir. Yang Si's words perfectly dispelled Su Yanxiao's suspicions. What right did she have to doubt Qin Gong? It was not Qin Gong's own will to switch sides. For the sake of Su Fei's branch, he had lost almost everything and everyone he could. Poor Qin Gong, he was still kept in the dark and was still brooding over the fact that he was late. Thinking of this, Su Yanxiao could not help but cover her face, as if doing so could lessen the shame in her heart. She didn't notice when Yang Si left. When she came back to her senses, night had fallen. The cold air blew in through the gap of the curtain, making the morning hall a little more gloomy and terrifying. Su Yanxiao raised her hand and patted her cheeks. She calmed her mind and devoutly burned incense and recited scriptures for her deceased mother. Another half an hour passed. Lady Su. Was this Qin Gong's voice? A trace of panic flashed through Su Yanxiao's heart. She faintly did not know how to face Qin Gong's shame. This shame was not only because of Su Fei's scheme against Qin Gong, but also because she had spoken without thinking and unintentionally hurt Qin Gong. Lady Su. Qin Gong called out again. His voice was a little louder than before, sounding a little anxious. Feng Jing, come in. Su Yanxiao then remembered that because of her previous encounter, she was afraid of men like a tiger. The soldier who brought her food for the first time was seen as a scourge by her. After that, the person who brought her food became Qin Gong. Qin Gong got permission and opened the curtain to come in. He was carrying a food box in his other hand. Su Yanxiao glanced at the sky outside and asked casually, It's so late? Qin Gong said rather shamefully, There were many military matters today, so I wasted some time. As a result, the food was a little late. That's not what I meant. Su Yanxiao lowered her head. Originally, she was just surprised that time passed too quickly. After hearing Qin Gong's words, it seemed like she was complaining that he delivered the food too late. Military matters are more important. How can I ignore official business for personal reasons? This is just a small matter. It's fine to eat later. Although it was delivered late, the food was steaming hot. There were 4 vegetarian dishes and a bowl of mushroom and egg soup. Su Yanxiao did not have much appetite. When she inadvertently saw Qin Gong's concerned gaze, she was startled and tried to finish all the food. Feng Jing. Qin Gong saw that Su Yanxiao had something to say. As he tidied up the food and cutlery, he gestured for her to speak with his eyes. Su Yanxiao asked softly, Bai Ri. You said that you would come and pick me up after defeating the enemy. Is that true? Qin Gong was shocked at first, then he said solemnly, "Of course it's true. Even if I have to risk my life, I will protect Lady Su." When Su Yanxiao heard this, she did not feel good. "Your lord is no longer my father. You have to be more careful with your words and actions," she said. "Feng Jing also has to think for yourself." Qin Gong knew that she was concerned about him. He could not help but feel happy. He said, "Even if Lady Su does not say it, I know what to do. My lord is not a narrow-minded person. She will not blame me for this. Lord Wen treated me well. Although my soul has passed away, I still owe him a favor. How can I turn my back on him and disregard the safety of my old lord's descendants? As long as I do not cross her bottom line, my lord will allow it." If the old lord had just died and he flattered the new lord, or even hit the old lord's descendants when they were down, this kind of person would be bitterly disappointed. Su Yanxiao saw that Qin Gong was not affected by her previous words and sighed in relief. With Qin Gong's company, she was not as fearful of the future. On the morning of the second day, the sky had just brightened when the sound of horse hooves came from outside the camp. This was sent by Su Pei to receive the corpses of Su Yanxiao and Su Fei. Su Yanxiao used clean water to wash her face. She was still dressed in mourning clothes. She lifted her hands and hugged the memorial tablets of her deceased parents. In order to show her sincerity, Su Pei even sent an old official to receive her. "Lady Su, please." The old official was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He wore wide sleeves and a wide belt. He had an elegant demeanor and a clean beard on his face. He had the air of an immortal. Su Yanxiao looked at him expressionlessly. She then shifted her gaze to the carriage. "No, as a daughter, I'm grateful for the kindness of my deceased father and mother. Unfortunately, they have passed away. An unfilial daughter can't do much for them, but I can't skip this journey." She looked at the old official and said, "Please show me filial piety first." Old official Su Pei's expression froze. He tried to dissuade her. "Lady Su, my daughter has already made up her mind. Please fulfill my filial piety." Su Yanxiao wanted to walk step by step to Mountain Barbican City. Chapter 1133. Minister Su Pei revealed a displeased expression, but he couldn't force Su Yanxiao either. If he allowed Su Yanxiao to walk to Mountain Barbican, what would the world say? Not only did he force her entire family to die, he even wanted to mistreat his only daughter? If he didn't allow it, the rumors in the outside world would be even worse. Minister Su Pei scrutinized Su Yanxiao's face. Seeing her resolute gaze, he knew that there was no room for discussion. "It's time. Let's go." Su Yanxiao walked at the front of the procession. She held Su Fei's and her mother's tokens in each hand. Her mourning clothes were very loose, and she wore a long and wide white cloth on her head, making her look even more frail. Due to the rules of mourning, she only wore coarse stockings and straw sandals. The road was uneven and there were gravel everywhere. It had rained last night, so many places were filled with puddles and mud. It was easy to imagine how much suffering Su Yanxiao would have to endure if she insisted on walking. Minister Su Pei saw that she wouldn't come to her senses. He swung his sleeves angrily and spoke with a gloomy expression. "Rise." Following the spirit guide's shout, the 7 coffins were lifted one by one. According to the order of seniority, Su Fei's coffin was placed at the front, followed closely by the official wife's coffin. The remaining 5 coffins were arranged according to the seniority of the concubine sons, followed by the 2 concubine daughters. White banners hung high, paper money fluttered in the wind, and the spirit guiding bell rang along the way. Qin Gong rode to a high vantage point and watched the procession until Su Yanxiao's silhouette became a white dot in his vision. "Captain Qin, are you worried about the lady's safety?" Seeing him return, Yang Si asked with a smile with a worried expression on his face. Qin Gong nodded honestly. "I am indeed a little worried." To Su Yanxiao, Su Pei was no longer her uncle. He was the culprit who had forced her father to his death and indirectly caused her mother's death. How could Qin Gong be at ease letting the 11-year-old Su Pei go alone into an environment filled with evil intentions? Yang Si said, "Lady Su is still young, but she has a sharp mind. Compared to her, Captain Qin is the more worrying one." Qin Gong's expression froze and his heart began to pound. To a certain extent, Yang Si represented the new master, Lu Shi. If he was dissatisfied, the new master would not have a good time either. Qin Gong did not know what he had done to annoy Yang Si. He cupped his hands nervously. "I'm young and immature. Please give me some pointers." Yang Si saw that his face was pale and he looked frightened. The little bit of bad taste in his heart was greatly satisfied. He helped Qin Gong up. Colonel Qin, what are you doing? I only had a sudden feeling just now, I didn't mean anything else. But when he suddenly said that, it was quite scary. Qin Gong's heart was pounding. He couldn't help but wonder if his actions in recent days had violated Yang Xi's taboo. Yang Xi smiled and narrowed his eyes. His attitude toward Qin Gong was no different than usual, and it made Qin Gong feel much more at ease. The procession set off in the morning and only arrived at the Mountain Urn City when the golden crow set in the west and the sky darkened. The current owner of Mountain Urn City was Su Bei. Su Yanxiao slowly walked to the bottom of the city, her eyes coldly looking at the slightly charred city gate. Her mind replayed the scene of the fire she had seen that day when she was fleeing. The charred marks told of the bitter battle that night. Su Bei had waited for an entire day in vain. He had even finished his dinner when he received news of Su Yanxiao's arrival. He suppressed the anger in his heart and once again put on a carefully prepared expression. Dressed in plain white clothes, he sincerely attended Su Fei's funeral. To disgust Su Fei, he had even prepared an incomparably flowery funeral oration. Su Bei cried for a long time, and the officials under the tent also had red eyes. Only Su Yanxiao remained unmoved. It was as if she was watching a monkey show. "Uncle, please restrain your grief and accept fate. Don't cry, otherwise father won't be able to rest in peace." Su Yanxiao remained expressionless. She said in a hoarse voice, "You and father were deeply in love, but due to the circumstances, you had no choice but to fight among yourselves. After father was defeated, he hung himself in despair. Mother wanted to follow him through life and death, so she passed away first. This is all fate. Uncle, you don't have to be too sad." Su Bei said, "I didn't kill Boren, but Boren died because of me. As for the funeral oration, I can't escape blame." As he finished speaking, he burst into tears again. Su Bei played the role of an uncle who grieved over his niece, agreeing to Su Yanxiao's every request. Unbeknownst to him, Su Yanxiao had dug a pit for him at this time. She accompanied Su Bei into the city with a normal expression. From time to time, she would comfort Su Bei and cooperate with his performance. Until, the blood on the ground. Previously their vision had been dim. Now that they had arrived at the brightly lit meeting hall, they realized that there were many faint bloody footprints on the ground. Looking at them, they saw that Su Yanxiao was wearing a pair of tattered straw sandals. Her stockings were covered in blood and mud. Everyone felt pain just by looking at it, but this person looked as if nothing had happened. Su Bei's heart skipped a beat. Su Yanxiao hung her head in shame. "Uncle, you are immersed in your pain and have no heart to care about the outside world. Niece also doesn't want to trouble uncle with such a small matter." The candlelight burned brightly. Su Bei felt that he couldn't put down his pride. If he really cared about his niece, how could he not know that she had walked so far barefoot and that her soles were damaged? To put it bluntly, it was just a show. If Su Yanxiao made him feel disgusted, then Jiang Pingji's letter made him so angry that he exploded on the spot. A few days after Su Fei's burial, Su Bei finally received the reply that he had been longing for. Su Bei took the secret letter from the messenger's hands and opened it to read. Beside him, Han Yu and Cheng Sun looked at each other. The latter's eyes were filled with doubt, while the former's expression was grave. The time taken for the messenger to make a round trip was too short. Unless the messenger saw Jiang Pingji on the way. Han Yu frowned deeply. He could already foresee the outcome. As expected, Su Bei's anger was much stronger than expected. He slammed his palm on the table, so angry that his shoulders were trembling. Outrageous. Lu Shi's arrogance knows no bounds. Su Bei was so angry that he threw the letter away and flipped the table over. Han Yu picked up the letter and glanced at the contents from the corner of his eyes. "I want 100% of the 9 prefectures and 4 seas." Merely 8 words, but they expressed her ambition, arrogance, and unruliness. This was not only her goal, but also her declaration of war against Su Bei. Su Bei's territory was within the borders of the 9 prefectures and 4 seas. She wanted 100%, while Su Bei could only ask for 0%. Su Bei wrote a letter to ask for peace, but she replied with such a letter. It was like a slap in the face. She wants 100% of the 9 prefectures and 4 seas? Since ancient times, how many people have dared to say such words? Isn't she afraid that the wind will cut her tongue? Su Bei's anger did not subside. Cheng Sun also came over to read the contents of the letter. He frowned and said, "She's just playing to the gallery. Even the ancestors of the previous dynasty would not dare to be so arrogant." Su Bei wanted to share the cake with her, but she wanted to eat the whole cake in one bite. Wasn't she afraid of choking? Han Yu did not say anything. Chapter 1134. Wenbin didn't say anything just now. Do you have other thoughts? Han Yu's eyebrows hadn't relaxed since he left the tent. There were faint wrinkles between his eyebrows. Gong Luo, how do you think our Lord is compared to the north borderline? Han Yu filtered the words in his mind over and over again before he asked cautiously. Cheng Sun was stunned at first, then he thought of something and his expression turned ugly. Jiang Pingji had even annihilated the northern borderline. No matter how difficult it was to conquer Su Bei, could it be more difficult than the northern borderline? Is Wenbin trying to say that Lord is inferior to Lu Shi? Cheng Sun was a master complex. He couldn't stand others saying that his master was not as good as others, even if it was Han Yu who said it. Han Yu shook his head. If he personally admitted that Lu Shi was inferior to his lord, wouldn't Su Bei flip the heavens if he heard this? That's not what I meant, Han Yu explained. Underestimating the enemy is the biggest trouble in using troops. Just like the scene just now, disregarding whether I want 100% of the 9 prefectures and 4 seas was arrogant or not in terms of qualifications, Jiang Pingji was more qualified than Su Bei. Those who were stronger than her had the right to say that she was arrogant, but those who were weaker than her should pay full attention instead of looking down on the enemy. Cheng Sun said, Wenbin is worrying too much. The Lord can't be compared to the northern borderline at all. Lu Shi may have defeated the northern borderline, but he may not be able to defeat his lord. The northern borderline is a tribe that has yet to undergo barbarism. Although they have brute force, they lack intelligence. Coupled with Lu Shi's cunning, it's not surprising that he was lucky enough to win. Han Yu was a little uncomfortable, but he didn't show it. Cheng Sun's opinion of Jiang Pingji was not ordinary. She came from an aristocratic family but mingled with the commoners. He heard that she had all kinds of people under her, the sons of prostitutes, mixed bloods, criminals. Dare he ask, did she have any decent people under her? The only one who caught her eye was Feng Jin. He was talented and virtuous, and his family background and bloodline were both first class. Oh, he had forgotten that there was still his younger brother. Cheng Sun could not help but frown at the thought. Why did father allow Cheng Yuan to assist Lu Shi? Why didn't he stop him? Cheng Sun continued, furthermore, the northern lands lack education. Most of the officials in her tent were rough people. All of them were lowly men of humble birth. The descendants of aristocratic families disdained to be associated with them. Helping the world is an important matter. How can a true hero work with a lowly and immoral person? Cheng Sun was a typical supporter of the aristocratic families. He was proud of his bloodline and birth, and disdained the commoners and commoners. The environment he had been living in since he was young had shaped this kind of character. His prejudice towards family status had long been deeply rooted, and it was difficult to remove it. Not only Cheng Sun, but many other scions also had the same idea. Although there were no written rules to divide people into different classes, in the current era where the aristocratic families were as solid as a fortress, the invisible social classes had already taken shape, and there was an insurmountable gap between them. Han Yu said, Wenbin's words are biased. If Han Yu wasn't Master Yuanjing's apprentice, but a simple descendant of an aristocratic family, he would agree with Cheng Sun. People of the same class were highly similar in terms of thought form and other aspects. However, the teacher Han Yu admired was Master Yuanjing. Master Yuanjing was born in a poor family, but he was recognized by many aristocratic families, who dared to question his attainments and qualifications as a teacher. Cheng Sun saw that Han Yu was a little angry, and then he remembered about Master Yuanjing. What was the difference between criticizing the poor and commoners in front of Han Yu and scolding his father in front of Han Yu? Although Lu Shi is a woman, she is also a feudal lord who ruled over several states. She has 2 horse farms in her territory. I'm afraid that it will be difficult for the lord to stop her alone, Han Yu continued. The most important thing now is to dispatch the 3 armies and prepare for war. The confrontation between 2 armies did not depend on who had a better family background and who would get more points. In troubled times, not to mention the aristocratic families, even if a knife was placed on their necks, they would still be beheaded. Su Fei was born in the Su family of Zhe County. If there was a ranking list of his family background, this guy could definitely climb to the top 50 in Dongqing. But what happened? Did his noble family save his life? Not only was he forced to die, but his wife and concubines were also raped by the thugs in front of his corpse. Only one of his children was left. Instead of talking about family background, it was better to say that the winner takes all. The winner was crowned king, and the loser's corpse was left in the wilderness. Cheng Sun also took the opportunity to say, well, Wenbin is right. They ended the conversation in a hurry. After the 2 of them separated, Han Yu looked at Cheng Sun's back with a complicated expression. He was very sure of Cheng Sun's talent and rationality, but his stubbornness about his family background gave him a headache. His lord, Su Pei, had many talented people under his command. They were loyal, intelligent, and courageous. Ever since the establishment of the team, Su Pei had never worried about the lack of talent. On the other hand, if it weren't for the participation of a few experts in the education field and the joint efforts of the Golden Scale Court to become a talent selection market, would she have enough people under her command? Not enough at all. Even now, it was a little hard to make ends meet, let alone in the past. With such a huge difference in the team, how could Jiang Pingji still firmly suppress Su Pei? It wasn't that Han Yu didn't understand, but he tried to persuade Su Pei indirectly, but Su Pei still didn't change. What else could he do? Su Pei valued the aristocratic families and looked down on the talented commoners, making them sit on the bench every day. Even the warmest of hearts would freeze. Thinking of this, Han Yu felt a little irritated for no reason. He simply found something for himself to do, such as inspecting the training of the soldiers in the military camp. As soon as he arrived at the drill ground, he heard a thunderous command. The soldiers followed the command and waved their spears, advancing and retreating in a clean and efficient manner. Captain Xie. Han Yu saw Xie Zhe, who was training the soldiers on the drill ground. Xie Zhe was a man with sword-like eyebrows, bright eyes, and eyes as dark as ink. He was heroic and handsome. At this moment he was bare-chested, revealing his muscular upper body. He was personally teaching the soldiers how to use the spear to defend against the enemy. On Military Counselor Han, Xie Zhe withdrew his spear and was about to step forward when a gust of cold wind suddenly blew past him, making him feel a little chilly. He was slightly embarrassed and grabbed a long robe that was piled up at the side, hastily putting it on to cover his muscles. "Why are you here, Military Counselor?" Han Yu said. "There will be big movements in the next few days. I'm thinking of countermeasures, so I dropped by to see how your training is going." Xie Zhe said, "I see." Han Yu looked at the young man in front of him. He was 2 years younger than him, but he was a head taller than him. No wonder he was an elite from the Xies. Han Yu smiled and squinted his eyes, watching Xie Zhe train the soldiers. Because of the presence of the military counselor, Xie Zhe, who was already strict, became even stricter, causing the soldiers to complain secretly. When the day's training was over, many of them were too tired to get up. "Why are all of you so tired? We've made a fool of ourselves in front of the military counselor. Continue to lie down, 2 more rounds of training." Xie Zhe was angry and amused at the same time. A few of the more cunning adjutants smiled and begged for mercy. "The general is mighty. We can't stand it anymore. We'll get up now, we'll get up now." Xie Zhe picked up the armor that was scattered on the side and held the helmet in his other hand. He invited Han Yu. "Military counselor, you haven't had dinner yet, right? Why don't you stay for a meal?" Chapter 1135. Whether it was a prosperous or chaotic world, talents were the backbone of a force's development. Jiang Pingji's strategists and generals all relied on swindling and swindling. Huang Song relied on his relatives from the Yuan family and Feng Ju's network of connections. Su Bei's side was no exception. Compared to the disparity in the talent structure of the former two, the latter's source of talent was more singular. Apart from a small number of vassals of the Su family, the rest were all famous scholars of various regions. Very few of them were from poor families. Even if they did, they would most likely end up sitting on the bench. Regardless of whether one was a civil official or a military general, if they wanted to be valued by Su Bei, they needed both talent and family background. On this point, apart from a few, most people, including Su Bei himself, felt that there was nothing wrong with it. Don't be fooled by the fact that Su Bei valued the aristocratic families and despised the poor. His reputation with the outside world was much better than Jiang Pingji's. In order to build up his reputation, he often visited famous scholars from all over the world. He was courteous and thirsty for talent. Now that he had made a name for himself and everyone was praising him, the rest would be easy. Like a blooming flower, the fragrance it emitted attracted countless bees seeking nectar. Only when famous people pledged their allegiance would they take the initiative to visit. After a round of selections, Su Bei's team of civil officials had basically taken shape. Su Bei was a picky person and had a slight obsessive-compulsive disorder. Most of the civil officials were of noble birth, but not all of the military generals were boorish men, right? Hence, Su Bei's team of generals was also an all-star lineup. It was incomparably luxurious. Take Xie Zhe for example. He was born in the Xie clan, and in terms of family background he was able to suppress all the military officials and strategists. He was almost comparable to his lord, Su Bei. If this had happened more than 20 years ago during the golden age of the Gongning Xia family, even Su Bei would have been inferior to him. No matter how one looked at it, Su Bei was someone who knew how to run a business. Of course, knowing how to run a business did not mean success. It wasn't impossible to play the worst possible scenario with the best cards in hand. "Counselor, are you not going to eat? Is it because the food in the camp is too coarse?" Xie chewed the vegetables and ate the rice, finishing the 2 big bowls in no time. His movements were neat and tidy, and the plates were even cleaner than his face. He only put down his chopsticks after he was 80% full. Seeing that Han Yu was preoccupied and had no appetite, she couldn't help but show her concern. Han Yu came back to his senses and looked embarrassed. "No, I was worried about something else. I was too engrossed in my thoughts." He picked up his chopsticks and ate 2 mouthfuls. The coarse rice grains were still a little raw, and the cold and hard dried vegetables made him a little uncomfortable. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that Xie's table was empty except for a bowl of clear soup with egg drops floating on it. Both of them had the same food. Han Yu tasted nothing while Xie ate happily. Commandant Xie's eccentricity makes me feel ashamed. Han Yu almost forced himself to finish the food. The more he did so, the more he appreciated Xie. Xie wasn't stupid either. He understood immediately. He smiled and said, "I'm used to it. The food in the army is not bad." Xie was of noble birth, but the Xie family was a family of martial arts. Naturally, it was different from other families. In an environment where Confucianism was revered, most of the Xie family's disciples were military strategists, and the books they studied were mostly related to military strategies. Now that the world was in chaos, Xie had been recommended to Su Pei's camp by a good friend. At such a young age, he was already the #1 general under Su Pei's command. "Why were you worried just now, military advisor?" Xie asked. "If you don't mind, military advisor can tell me and we can discuss it together." "This matter has something to do with Commandant Xie," Han Yu said. "Lu Shi has led his troops to the south and is heading straight for Zhe County, Hu County and other places. A war is imminent, and it's almost unavoidable. In my opinion, it will be difficult for the Lord to resist Lu Shi's edge with just her forces. The people under the Lord's command also look down on Lu Shi. With such a mentality, I'm afraid they will suffer a great loss. Selfishly, perhaps they can find an alliance and use it to restrain Lu Shi." Jiang Pingji used alliances to break the deadlock. Naturally, Han Yu could use the same method to make her suffer. 2 against 1 was better than 1 against 1. Xie pondered for a while and asked, "Military advisor, do you want to form an alliance with Huang Song?" The feudal lords around Su Pei were either incompetent or had a grudge against him. Those who were incompetent were mostly swallowed up by Su Pei. Those who had a grudge against him, such as Yang Tao who had half of Zhangzhou eaten up, were lucky that Su Pei didn't pick up his axe and beat him up. How could he want to form an alliance to fight Jiang Pingji? The only forces that were further away were Huang Song and the Nie family of Zhongzhou. The Nie family was temporarily out of the game and had to clean up their internal affairs. They couldn't join in for the time being. Huang Song was the only one left. Speaking of which, Huang Song had wanted to beat Jiang Pingji up for a long time. Han Yu nodded and said, "Although the grudge between Lu Shi and Huang Song in Sangzhou and Qinzhou was successfully resolved, the conflict still exists. If it wasn't for the overall situation, the 2 of them would definitely fight. If something were to happen to the Lord, the next feudal lord to be dealt with would certainly be Huang Song. Most of the strategists under his command are clear-headed. They wouldn't be unaware of the severity of the situation. Huang Song and the Lord are already in a mutually dependent relationship. After Jiang Pingji got rid of Su Pei, the next one would be Huang Song. If Huang Song helped Su Pei fight Jiang Pingji now, it would be 2 against 1. The chances of winning were high. If she waited until she dealt with Su Pei, Huang Song would be helpless. Out of consideration for their own interests, the possibility of Su Pei and Huang Song forming an alliance was not low. Xie said, "Logically speaking, it's feasible. However, Huang Song is a treacherous person. He might not agree. To him, it's better to learn from the fishermen and wait until the Lord and Lu Shi are evenly matched. Then he'll look for an opportunity to launch a sneak attack. In that case, it would be more worthwhile to severely injure 2 opponents at once." Han Yu knitted his brows with a heavy heart. Xie smiled and said, "The military counselor is very afraid of Lu Shi." The civil and military officials under Su Pei looked down on Jiang Pingji's grassroots team, but Han Yu's style was different from the others. I had some interactions with Lu Shi when I was young. That person can't be judged by common sense. At this point Han Yu paused and didn't continue. No matter how far away Jiang Pingji was, whenever Han Yu thought of her, he would think of the foot-washing water that flowed upstream. *CK. *CK. One day he would feed her back. Xieze echoed, sigh, underestimating the enemy in battle is a big taboo. The military counselor's worries aren't without reason. Jiang Pingji knew nothing about this. Even if she knew, she wouldn't be afraid. War wasn't a turn-based game where one's family background was the highest. Whichever family had a higher score would win. If that was the case, would there still be a day for the poor in this world? Jiang Pingji was in a meeting. Know yourself and know your enemy to win 100 battles. It was necessary to do homework before going to war. In order to boost morale, everyone liked to analyze the enemy while trampling them to the ground. Strategically, they despised the enemy. Tactically, they valued the enemy. The analysis started with Su Pei. Then they picked out the more famous civil and military officials. Needless to say, Han Yu was an old acquaintance. Wei Xi was his classmate. He even knew how old Wei Xi was, let alone the others. Cheng Sun, who had been active in the public eye recently, was Qing Yuan's elder brother. It wasn't difficult to find him either. As for the other famous scholars of virtue and prestige, their deeds before Su Bei became an official were also investigated. Chapter 1136. When she was done, she picked out the more famous generals under Su Pei's banner and analyzed them all. Xieze. Jiang Pingji read out a name. There aren't many with the surname Xie in Dongqing with a good background. Because of Su Pei's obsessive-compulsive disorder, the people under his banner were all from good families. Xieze was one of the top 3 generals under Su Pei's banner, so his family background was definitely not low. Yang Si and Su Pei had been in contact for 2 years and had a basic understanding of each other's power, but there was not much information about Xieze. Wei Xi glanced at Li Yun, who was baffled by his stare. Xieze? If I remember correctly, this person is from the desolate Xie family? Hearing the words desolate Xie family, Li Yun could not help but perk up his ears. That was the family that raised his father, Xie Qian. Jiang Pingji glanced at the booklet in her hands. According to the information, Xieze was indeed related to the desolate Xie family. It should be. Because of Li Yun, Jiang Pingji had also learned about the desolate Xie family, but that was a few years ago. According to Lu Shi, something happened more than 20 years ago. The desolate Xie family and the Langyue Wang family faded out of the public eye at almost the same time. From that time on, the two families slowly recalled their sons who held important positions in the court, leaving only a few idle positions. I haven't seen the desolate Xie family in a long time. I didn't expect them to support Su Pei in secret. Jiang Pingji pouted, deeply doubting Lu Shi's judgment of the desolate Xie family. She was the one with the potential, but now she was relying on the opposing family. There must be an inside story, Wei Xi said with a smile. Wei Xi said with a smile. The biggest cheat he had in his rebirth was probably knowing the gossip of various families. If I remember correctly, Xieze and Duke Xinzhao are brothers-in-law. Since he became an official, Duke Xinzhao is most likely related by marriage. Rather than helping an outsider, why not help one's own relatives? Brother-in-law? Jiang Pingji was surprised. Wei Xi said, Su Pei's wife was born in the desolate Xie family. She is the eldest daughter, and her younger sister was betrothed to Xieze. Therefore they are brothers-in-law. Many unforeseen events had happened in this life, causing many things to be different from the previous life, but most interpersonal relationships had not changed. Jiang Pingji said, I see. Wei Xi continued, speaking of which, this Xieze and Han Mei are somewhat related. Li Yun, who was called out, was dumbfounded. The surprise of life is to suddenly have a relative. The atmosphere at the scene was so relaxed that it didn't seem like a pre-war analysis meeting, but more like a gossip exchange. Everyone listened with great interest. Li Yun's identity wasn't a secret, but he wouldn't go around announcing it. Therefore many people didn't know about it. Who would have thought that the poor lad Li Yun, who everyone saw as an inspiration, was actually a tall, rich, and handsome man? Han Mei's father, Xie Qian, was the eldest son of the Xie family. Now, the leader of the Xie family is Xie Qian's younger legitimate brother and Xieze is the leader's legitimate son. In terms of seniority, Han Mei is his cousin. Wei Xi said, the leader of the Xie family has 5 sons and 3 daughters. Xieze is ranked 5th. Everyone was astonished. Their gazes towards Li Yun became even more passionate. If that's the case, if Uncle Xie Qian hadn't died that year, Our Han Mei would have been the rightful successor to the Xia clan's patriarch. Dian Yen teased as he patted Li Yun's shoulder. Jiang Pingji also chimed in. Adding on the flaw of his family background, wasn't Li Yun the Prince Charming of the livestream room's viewers' dreams? Li Yun said embarrassedly, I'm afraid that what happened that year is a hurdle in my father's heart. This matter shouldn't be mentioned. Why was Xie Qian removed from the Xie family? Li Yun was well aware of the reason. It was all the fault of the evildoer who possessed his mother's body. That year, Xie Qian brought Li Yun and Wang Huijun to Hejin County to seek an audience with Master Qin, hoping to produce an evildoer who would take over the nest of the magpies. Unexpectedly, the evildoer discovered it one step ahead and acted first, attempting to silence Xie Qian. After the incident, she produced irrefutable evidence to falsely accuse Xie Qian of killing his wife and absconding. On the other hand, he climbed onto the throne of Dongqing's emperor. The Xie family was forced to hand over Xie Qian. At first, the Xie family supported Xie Qian with all their might. They searched for Xie Qian while contending with the Dongqing royal family. However, the woman from another world had many tricks up her sleeves. She relied on the items given by the system to set up several immortal traps. The Xie family could escape once, but they couldn't escape a second time. In the end, in order to clean up the mess, they could only take a step back and remove Xie Qian from the family. The Wang family, on the other hand, felt deeply ashamed. The most honorable lady of the Wang family was actually willing to become the concubine of the descendant of a cart driver. How shameful. In the eyes of the Wang family of Langya, the ancestors of the Dongqing royal family were cart drivers. Even if they sat on the throne and wore the dragon robes, they were still cart drivers who couldn't be seen in public. The woman from another world happily climbed onto the throne and entered the palace. Her methods of flattering and seducing the master were all heard by the families of Dongqing. She was full of tricks. It was even more exciting than pornographic novels. The noble lady of the Wang family, one of the twin beauties, actually took off her clothes and danced for the emperor in front of the palace maids. She took the initiative to use her mouth and hands to relieve the emperor and said those filthy words. The Wang family was deeply embarrassed. They could only choose to retire and use time to forget the shameful Wang Huiyun. They had no choice but to retire. They couldn't let others misunderstand the Wang family's upbringing and that they could only produce playthings comparable to prostitutes. There were 4 noble families in Dongqing: the Feng family of Shangyang, the Wang family of Langya, the Xie family of Ganning, and the Meng family of Cangzhou. Among the 4 families, the Feng family, the Wang family, and the Xie family had the longest history. The Wang family couldn't stand this kind of grievance. It was too shameful. Wang Huiyun was shameless, but the other ladies of the Wang family were. Since Li Yun had said so, the others naturally wouldn't pursue the matter to the end. At most, they gave him a smile that could only be understood but not expressed in words. The following gossip meeting? The pre-war analysis meeting basically centered around Wei Ci. None of the intelligence gathered was as detailed as he was. When it came to the relationships between the families, their temperaments and their experiences, he knew everything that was written in the intelligence, and he knew everything that was not written in the intelligence. It was really an encyclopedia. Not only were the generals and officials listening with relish, but the audience was also listening happily. There was even an audience member who said, "If Beauty Ci was in our world, the #1 paparazzi wouldn't be a match for him." Jiang Pingji inadvertently glanced at him and secretly felt sorry for him. After the meeting, she turned off the streaming room and secretly asked Wei Ci, "How do you know so much?" Wei Ci paused suspiciously. "My lord, do you dislike me for being talkative?" He was so clear about the family affairs, and it spanned across the 5 countries. He didn't wait for Jiang Pingji to speak and said, "It's just that I was too free in the past. It's more convenient to deal with the situation of the families." The male emperor had the Empress to help him deal with the trivial matters between the officials and the noblewomen, but it was a little awkward for the Empress. Wei Ci dealt with these trivial matters in secret, and then passed the memorial to His Majesty. Chapter 1137. Seeing that there was no one around, Jiang Pingji deliberately lowered her voice and teased him with a smile. "With such a virtuous husband, what more can I ask for?" Suddenly, the heat climbed from Wei Ci's collarbone to his ears, making him embarrassed and unnatural. Jiang Pingji loved to see Wei Ci's embarrassed look. Every time she saw it, her mood would be better. She stopped while she was ahead and changed the topic with a smile. "It's a pity for Han Mei. If it wasn't for the evildoer, maybe he'd be the real God's favored one now. He was a winner in life, but he was ruined by a girl from another world who didn't know what to do. Xie Qian was pitiful, Li Yun was pitiful, and the real Wang Huiyun was even more wrong than Dou. Jiang Pingji had seen the rubbing of Wang Huiyun's manuscript. In terms of talent, even the famous people of the time were inferior to her. Maybe after a few hundred years she could still be a talented woman praised by the people of the future. Now, probably only this suspected talented slut was left? She cheated on her marriage for no reason, cruelly attempted to kill her husband and son, went crazy and seduced the 3 brothers of the royal family, followed the eldest brother, then the second brother who usurped the throne, and finally had sex with the 3rd brother, Prince Changshu. She was willing to become a concubine even if she fell out with her family. The future generations wanted to adapt her story into a television series, but they couldn't even clear her name. Jiang Pingji didn't know whether to say that the woman from another world was brainless or that the system was too disgusting. The model couple who loved each other were not only separated by life and death, but the family of 3 also fell apart. If the same thing happened to her, she would make the woman from another world pay no matter how poor she was. She was feeling sorry for Li Yun's family, but Wei Xi's words stunned her. Evildoer? What evildoer? He looked puzzled. Jiang Pingji then realized that Wei Xi still didn't know about the woman from another world. She frowned and generously shared the gossip with Wei Xi. She also wanted to know if the system was involved in Wei Xi's life. She didn't know why, but she felt that something was wrong, like a puzzle that was missing a few important pieces. Han Mei's mother, Wang Huiyun, was possessed by an unknown evildoer when she gave birth. Xie Qian noticed that the person next to him had changed her mind and was trying to use Master Liaochen to get rid of the demon. However, the evildoer was quite capable. He had noticed the news one step ahead and made the first move to ambush Xie Qian and the monk Han Mei, who was still in swaddling clothes. Xie Qian was lucky enough to escape, but unfortunately he lost his memory. He and Han Mei ended up stranded in Wanzhou. The evildoer used Wang Huiyun's body to serve 2 sovereigns and 1 king, giving birth to a son and a daughter. His son is the 4th prince of Dongqing Wumajun. His daughter is Lu Huan, who was adopted by my father. After that, the evildoer hooked up with the emperor of Zhongzhou. She gave up her position as the imperial concubine and went to Zhongzhou to repeat the same trick. She took over the body of the eldest daughter of the Du family and entered the palace to become the empress. Oh, that's right, she also wrote the famous 4 self-accomplishment classics for women. This piece of gossip made Wei Xi dumbfounded on the spot. Fortunately, Jiang Pingji had closed the streaming room in advance. Otherwise, Wei Xi's blank and stunned expression would have been seen by other fairies. After a long while, Wei Xi regained his senses. What about being possessed by a demon? He could be reborn from the future and return to his youth. Such a strange thing had already happened, not to mention being possessed by a demon. Wei Xi carefully recalled the information related to Li Yun and said with certainty, "As far as I know, there are no traces of this evildoer. Come to think of it, there is really a hand called fate in the unseen world pushing everything. How can it be so easy to change fate?" Jiang Pingji acutely sensed that something was wrong. "Zixiao, you mean, even if there was no evildoer, Han Mei's fate would not change? Without the intervention of the evildoer, logically speaking, Li Yun should be the legitimate Zongzi of the Xie family. Indeed, as far as I know, Han Mei has always been Li Yun, and not Xie Yun." Wei Xi nodded, confirming Jiang Pingji's guess. This matter has to start from Han Mei's previous generation. Although there was no evildoer causing trouble, Xie Qian and his wife's lives were equally rough. In Wei Xi's previous life, there was no interference from the woman from another world or the system. The aristocratic families were still prosperous, but the Dongqing royal family was similarly rotten to the core. What was the tradition of the Dongqing royal family? There were only things that others could not think of, and there was nothing that they did not dare to do. Killing brothers, seizing sister-in-law, tarnishing the official's wife, humiliating the concubine's mother. How could it be summed up with the word chaos? However, the emperor only dared to bully the officials of humble origins. In the face of the imperial power, how could the commoners of humble families resist? Even if they tarnished their wives, they could not cause a ruckus. One year, during the general assessment, Prince Changshu sponsored an assembly. Xie Qian and his wife happened to be in Shangjing, and they also received an invitation. Coincidentally, the emperor was also dressed in a white dragonfish suit. At the assembly, he fell in love with the beautiful Wang Huiyun at first sight. Since then he could not eat or drink, tossing and turning restlessly in bed. However, Xie Qian and his wife's backing was too strong. Even the emperor did not dare to touch them casually. In order to gain the emperor's favor, a eunuch by the emperor's side secretly gave him a rotten idea. Organize a hunting activity, use the hunting to send Xie Qian away, and then let the noblewomen of the royal family trick Wang Huiyun and make her submit. The emperor thought that Wang Huiyun would not dare to make a fuss for the sake of the family's reputation and would swallow this grievance in silence. Unexpectedly, she was extremely ambitious. The emperor accidentally killed Wang Huiyun. When Xie Qian realized the truth, he lost his rationality and set up an ambush in the hunting ground to kill the emperor. Although the aftermath was done well, it was hard to guarantee that the truth would not be exposed. In order not to implicate the family, he could only pretend to fall off a cliff with his son and fake his death to hide in the forest. After the emperor's death, he was conferred the title of Emperor Yang of Qin. Emperor Yang's second brother, Prince Gongshun of Hejian, killed his eldest nephew and usurped the throne. The Xie family and the Wang family contributed greatly to the destruction of the Dongqing royal family. Although the time-traveling woman interfered, the fate of Xie Qian's family was not much different from the previous life. If not, Wei Xi would have noticed the difference between Li Yun and the previous life. It's not easy for Xie Qian. After hearing Wei Xi's words, Jiang Pingji felt a little more sympathy for Xie Qian. Where is the demon that my lord mentioned hiding now? Jiang Pingji laughed involuntarily and asked, why are you asking this? Are you going to run off to get rid of the demon? Wei Xi nodded honestly and said, I know a little about Shenshu. Although I can't compare to Master Liaochen or Jinren Liuru, but Jiang Pingji imagined the scene of Wei Xi carrying a peachwood sword and holding a talisman to catch the demon. She suddenly laughed out loud. Zixiao, you'd better be my strategist. That demon has been killed by me long ago. Is it your turn to save the damsel in distress? Jiang Pingji did not know the level of Wei Xi's Shenshu, but he did not even notice the abnormality of the yin and yang jade pendant. If he met the time-traveling woman, not to mention getting rid of the demon, he might have been pressed to the ground by the demon and lost his chastity. She could cook the frog in her house. Others could not even think about it, let alone touch it. Wei Xi looked embarrassed and looked at Jiang Pingji with hidden bitterness. After a while, Jiang Pingji looked like a curious baby and asked him, is there really Shenshu in this world? She believed in science, but she was also quite interested in ghosts and gods. Of course there is. Wei Xi saw through her thoughts and added, it exists if you believe it, it doesn't exist if you don't. Chapter 1138. Please read it, my lord. After flirting with Wei Xi, she still had to do what she had to do. In ancient times, wars were fought with a good reason. In layman's terms, there had to be a legitimate reason to start a war. With a reason, the officials had to announce it to the world. Jiang Pingji handed the matter of the declaration to Qiguan Rang and became a hands-off boss. It was fine for her to speak in the vernacular, but it was difficult for her to write in classical Chinese. The literati of ancient times did not use vulgarities when they scolded others. They had to scold in a refined and reserved manner, yet they had to scold to their heart's content. Qiguan Rang did not disappoint her. This declaration seemed to explode in a small universe, and it was written extremely viciously. The entire declaration had more than 1,000 words. Every word was painful and every sentence was heart-wrenching. Every piece of incriminating information had concrete evidence. From the crime to the accusation, no one could refute it. The viciousness made it seem as if it wanted to dig out the graves of 18 generations of people's ancestors. It made one want to vomit blood. Jiang Pingji liked it. Jiang Pingji was very satisfied. The audience in the streaming room ate melons while watching by the master in the streaming room. After reading it, everyone expressed that the declaration seemed very ordinary. Ida Chugum, although I like Qiguan Rang very much, this declaration is really ordinary. At least I won't be angry when I read it. Xingxing Kaihong Tang, I second the comment above. He won't be beaten up by Qiguan Rang's fans, will he? Snoopy, the literary talent of the declaration is worthy of recognition, but the content. I don't think it will anger Su Bei. Streamer, you need a Chinlinda. It was said that Chinlinda's declaration made old Chow break out in a cold sweat after reading it. His head was so swollen that it stopped hurting. The audience expressed that they were not affected at all. Even a 10-year-old kid on their side could win this level of scolding. Lao Ciji Lianming, consider the context of the era. Do you think Qiguan Rang and the rest scolded people continuously, cursing the other party's parents and 18 generations of ancestors? For example, NMB, CNMB, WCNMB? The level of the declaration was already ruthless enough. The audience in the streaming room lived in an era of information explosion. The internet was a virtual platform. People could vent their inner darkness to their heart's content, cursing other people's female relatives for no reason. In ancient times, there were naturally people who were full of vulgarities. However, for scholars like Qiguanrang who had been well-read since young, it was probably more difficult for them to open their mouths and say, Motherf asterisk cur, than for the streamer to unify Jojo. If this declaration of war is issued, Su Bei will definitely bear a grudge against Wenjing. Jiang Pingji teased him with a smile, but Qiguanrang did not budge. So be it. As long as his lord didn't lose, he didn't need to be afraid of how many people would hate him. Alright, use this declaration of war and send it out, Jiang Pingji said. I can already imagine Su Bei's ashen face and the look on his face as he vomits blood. Qiguanrang bowed and said, yes. Once the declaration was announced to the world, Su Bei quickly received the news. Su Bei's reaction was more intense than Jiang Pingji had imagined. He was so angry that his chest rose and fell rapidly, as if he would stop breathing at any moment. Lanting, did Lu Shi really say that? Su Bei extended his finger and pointed to the north. He looked as if he had suffered a great blow. Not only was his face ashen with anger, but even his breathing was labored. The declaration of war has already been sent out. I'm afraid it won't be long before all the feudal lords know about it. Han Yu mercilessly stated the truth. Su Bei choked on his words. He was so angry that he wanted to slap the table to vent his anger, but his years of upbringing allowed him to restrain himself. Who didn't know how to send a declaration of war? If Lu Shi dared to make the first move, don't blame him for retaliating. His subordinates had never lost a battle of insults. Don't be fooled by Su Bei's tendency to value the aristocratic families and despise the poor. He didn't blindly value them. At least the aristocratic families that he valued had real capabilities. For example, the officials in his tent were all famous scholars who had made it onto the annual evaluation list. In terms of overall literary talent, Jiang Pingji's side was really not up to par. While preparing for a counterattack through public opinion, she also plotted to regain her dignity. The declaration of war had already been sent out. The arrow on the bowstring had to be fired. This battle had to be fought even if they didn't want to. Su Bei asked, Lu Shi's 10,000 vanguard troops are still stationed outside Shanwu City, right? Han Yu replied, yes. Find a reason to take it down. How can we allow the enemy to linger on the side of our bed? The 10,000 elites under Lu Shi's command are comparable to an ordinary army of 30,000. If we allow them to train outside Shanwu City, I don't know how the world will ridicule me. It's better to eradicate them and give Lu Shi some warning. Su Bei said angrily. At this moment he made a decision in a very straightforward manner. There was no trace of his usual hesitation. Han Yu replied, yes. Even if they allowed the enemy's elites to linger on their own territory, they couldn't do it this way. Qin Gong and Su Bei had a grudge against each other for murdering their master. That fellow would definitely find an opportunity to avenge Su Fei. If this vanguard troop was eliminated, it could suppress Jiang Pingji's morale and boost the morale of the army. Secondly, it could give Jiang Pingji a little warning. If there was only Qin Gong, Su Bei's plan would have a high chance of success. The 10,000 elites might have been swallowed up. However, besides Qin Gong, there was also Yang Si who assisted him in the vanguard. Yang Si was not an outsider. He had interacted with Su Bei for 2 years. How could he not know Su Bei's character? When he saw the declaration of war, he slapped his thigh. He scolded, what a good Qiguan Wenjing. You scolded to your heart's content. But it's hard on these old bones of mine. Qin Gong was shocked by him. His face was full of confusion. Qing Yuan asked, what is the meaning of this military counselor? Yang Si replied, Su Bei is the most petty person. Wenjing used the declaration of war to scold him. He can't find trouble with the Lord, so why not use us as an example? If nothing goes wrong, there will be movements in Shanqing after dark in the next 2 days. They will ambush our camp. This is not a place to stay for long. Based on his understanding of Su Bei, this troublemaker was usually as indecisive as a young lady. When he was agitated, he was especially decisive. The situation was tense. It was better to retreat first. If it was a small-scale battle, 10,000 elites would definitely be enough. However, when they had rushed to support Su Fei, the army had not brought any extra military equipment other than rations and other necessities. Without siege equipment, they would not be able to cause much damage to Shanqing. Instead, they would lose their lives. A real man knew when to yield and when to stand tall. If they could win, they would fight. If they could not win, they would strategically retreat. Yang Si thought for a moment and decided to retreat. The Lord's army is not far from Hu County. If we retreat now we can rendezvous with them. Qin Gong was speechless. At this moment, Yang Si was exceptionally glad that his lord valued the delivery of intelligence. If this declaration of war had been sent 2 days later, they would not even know how they were killed by Su Bei's schemes. If we retreat now, we will definitely alert Shanqing and cause them to pursue us. Qin Gong frowned and suggested, why don't we wait for the sky to turn dark and leave the tents and bonfires as they are? Then we can lead the soldiers and retreat slowly. By the time they discover us, we will have already retreated far away. As Yang Si expected, Su Bei gathered his troops and prepared for a night attack. However, they pounced on empty air. By the time the army arrived, there was not even a shadow left, let alone a human figure. Yang Jingrong. Su Bei's first reaction was to think of Yang Si. Instantly he felt a toothache. Did he smear oil on the soles of his feet? Chapter 1139. Xieze looked at the gloomy Su Bei and volunteered himself. My lord, judging by the time they haven't gone far. Do you want me to lead some men to chase after them? Su Bei suppressed the anger in his chest. He didn't show any extreme reactions on the surface, but in his heart he had already criticized Yang Si countless times. Of course we have to chase after them. Once we catch up we will kill them without mercy. Su Bei recalled the order he had read during the day and his heart ached even more. He couldn't make an example of Jiang Pingji or Qiguan Rang, but he could use Yang Si and his men to repay some of the interest. Hu County was considered his home ground. If he allowed a few outsiders to do as they pleased in his territory, would he still have any face left? Xieze replied, yes, my lord. He was about to leave when Han Yu, who had accompanied him, said, Officer Xie, please wait. You aren't familiar with the terrain here. Let me go with you. Although the terrain of Hu County was flat, the mountain range near Shanqing was complex and rugged. It was the best place for an ambush. Xieze wasn't familiar with the terrain near Shanqing. If he chased after them rashly, he was afraid that he would be fooled by Yang Si. Han Yu's actions made Xieze feel grateful. He looked at him with a joyful expression. Thank you, military advisor. Xieze and Han Yu led the troops in pursuit. Without a professional scapegoat, the officials under Su Bei's command didn't dare to go against the wind for fear of angering their lord. Everyone was silent. Su Bei looked at the burning campfire in the enemy's camp. The anger in his heart grew. Burn it, burn it. It's an eyesore. Su Bei ordered his men to burn down the camp. Watching the fire burn, the anger in his heart dissipated a little. Unbeknownst to him, the fire spread up to the sky. It was as if an orange sun was about to rise from the horizon. In the distance, with his strong eyesight, Qin Gong faintly saw a red glow in the direction of the original camp. He admired Yang Si even more. Military advisor, look. Our camp is on fire. That bastard Su Bei has really flown into a rage out of humiliation. Qin Gong reminded Yang Si. Yang Si's reaction was very lively. Ah! If it wasn't for this reaction he wouldn't be Su Bei. In the eyes of the enemy Yang Si's reaction was extremely annoying, but in the eyes of his teammates, it was cute, lively and humorous. Qin Gong imagined Su Bei stomping his feet in anger. His mood was extremely good, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. When Qing Yuan saw that the two of them were so happy, he could not help but pour a bucket of cold water on them. According to the military advisor, Su Bei is a narrow-minded person. Not only did he burn down the tents to vent his anger, he will definitely send troops to chase after us. Qing Yuan frowned and worried. They took advantage of the night to leave. In order not to expose their tracks, they did not even dare to light a torch on the way. Although the soldiers were strong, the mountain road was rugged and difficult to traverse. There were no torches to illuminate the way, so the speed of the army was greatly hindered. On the other hand, Su Bei's pursuers did not have to worry about this. Their speed of pursuit was definitely faster than theirs. In less than 4 to 6 hours he would definitely be able to catch up to them. Yang Si replied, of course Su Bei would send troops to pursue us. If he didn't do so, would he be the narrow-minded Su Bei? Since they had already shed all pretense of cordiality, Yang Si spared no effort in defaming Su Bei. Qing Yuan's eyelids were half-lidded. He asked him coldly, since the military advisor has already predicted this, I'm sure you have a countermeasure? Yang Si replied, what is real is fake and what is fake is real. Jiang Pingji's strategists all had different temperaments. Putting aside Wei Ci, Feng Jin, and the others, Yang Si was considered to be easier to get along with among them. Occasionally they could joke around. Forgive me for being slow-witted, I don't understand the military advisor's meaning. In other words, Qing Yuan's words meant, speak human language, don't pretend. Yang Si rode on the horse's back, leisurely holding onto the reins. His body seemed to have no bones as it jolted along with the horse. Although we don't know who is leading the troops in pursuit, that person's understanding of the terrain around Shanwu City is certainly not as clear as our field officer Qin. Yang Si said with absolute certainty, now that the sky is dark, there is no blockade in front of us, but they have to guard against our ambush. Qing Yuan suddenly understood. Does the military advisor mean to deliberately mislead us and use this to delay time? Yang Si replied, not only this, but we can also test out who is pursuing us. Qin Gong listened attentively at the side. When he heard this, he could not help but interrupt and ask, test out who is pursuing us? Can you even test out this? The night was dark and visibility was too low. They did not light torches to illuminate, so the scouts could not find out who the enemy's general was. Yes. Yang Si said, after a few tests we most likely have an idea. If it is an ordinary person, the deliberate misdirection will naturally play a big role, and we can take the opportunity to ambush them. If it is someone like Han Yu, we can at most deceive him for a while, not to mention setting up an ambush. In other words, they could judge whether the opponent's leader was difficult to deal with based on the enemy's reaction speed. Yang Si sighed, Si and Wenbin have been dealing with each other for several years, and we know each other very well. If he chases us, I'm afraid it will be a tough battle. Qin Gong said, the military advisor will certainly not lose to him. Yang Si smiled cheekily, that's natural. Han Wenbin is still too much of a gentleman. Naturally he will not be able to defeat Si. After hearing this, Qin Gong and Qing Yuan fell into a strange silence. Didn't Yang Si's words mean that he was even more shameless than Han Yu? Qin Gong was very familiar with the terrain around the Barbican. After all, he had led the soldiers under his command to train in these places. In order to prevent the enemy from being one step ahead of them, Qin Gong also carefully selected a route that was suitable for an ambush, but without taking a shortcut. This night was destined to be thrilling. It is indeed Yang Jingrong's doing. She is very good at hiding the truth. With the light of the torch, Han Yu could barely see the surrounding terrain. It was a col, narrow on the outside and wide on the inside, which was very suitable for an ambush. Han Yu dared not gamble with the lives of his soldiers, so he could only send someone to investigate. The scouts reported that there were traces of an ambush near the colonel. If the scouts didn't find anything, Han Yu would have been a little worried. But when they said that they found shadows of people lying in ambush, he was not worried anymore. Military advisor Han, is there an ambush on the other side of the col? An ambush? Before Xie could finish, Han Yu said with certainty, I'm afraid not. If it was someone else, this col was indeed a good place to set up an ambush, but Yang Si was different. He liked to do things in the opposite direction. In places that others thought were impossible to set up an ambush, he liked to play some tricks to catch people off guard. Xie frowned. He ordered the army to temporarily rest and reorganize while he sent someone into the col to test the situation. Just as Han Yu had guessed, the shadows that the scouts found were only the maze that Yang Si had set up. Although there were traces of an ambush on both sides of the col, there were actually no soldiers lying in ambush. There were only piles of stones and withered branches and weeds. Under the cover of the night, it was extremely difficult to tell whether it was a human or something else. The shadows were very good at fooling people. At least the scouts were fooled. Han Yu frowned and said in a low voice, continue to chase. If we don't catch up with them by dawn, the army can prepare to return. Xie was in a dilemma. If so, the Lord, Han Yu said, it's okay. I will explain everything to the Lord. The night was dark. Yang Si didn't dare to light an open fire, so the marching speed was greatly reduced. Once the sun rose, they would be able to see clearly. Wouldn't they be able to run fast? Chapter 1140. Military Advisor Han, it's less than an hour before daybreak. Xie looked at Han Yu with a serious expression. His sword-like eyebrows were tightly knitted together. Throughout the night, the closest distance between them and the enemy was less than a quarter of an hour's walk. However, the enemy was cunning and they managed to widen the gap. The enemy seemed to have calculated everything and always escaped at the most critical moment. They were right in front of their eyes, but they couldn't catch them. As Yang Si said, Han Yu was too much of a gentleman. He was at a disadvantage when he met a guy like Yang Si who faced the wind head-on. Not only was his positioning a mystery, but his maneuvering was also breathtaking. Less than an hour? Han Yu looked up at the night sky and blinked his dry eyes. He only felt better when he forced tears out of his eyes. It was a big burden for Han Yu to stay up all night and follow the army to chase after the enemy. Xie said, they should be able to reach the border of Sichuan Plain before daybreak. The night sky was much lighter and the visibility was much higher than before. It was less difficult to travel. Sichuan Plain? Xie sighed. We miscalculated this time. We shouldn't have waited until nightfall to launch a sneak attack. Han Yu said helplessly, Lu Shi's troops are not the same as ordinary elites. If we had chosen to fight face to face, it wouldn't have been difficult to kill 10,000 people, but it would have been a great loss. How could the Lord agree to a deal that involves sacrificing 800 men to kill 1,000 of the enemy? Han Yu hadn't seen the combat strength of Jiang Pingji's elite troops, but according to his analysis, they were definitely the best in the world. If Jiang Pingji didn't have such confidence, she wouldn't have dared to attack Su Bei after tearing apart the Mengs and the northern borderline. Releasing the dragon into the sea and the tiger back to the mountain. Xie's eyes flashed with a trace of seriousness. There will be endless troubles in the future. Han Yu snorted and said, it's not that we can't stop them. Yang Si had played a trick on him all night. If he didn't get back at him, he would be seen through. Sichuan Plain is a good place. Xie was confused. He didn't understand what was so good about Sichuan Plain. Yang Si said, speaking of Sichuan Plain, what do you think of first? Xie was originally from the north. He was half a northerner, so he didn't know much about the south. However, if we were talking about the Sichuan Plain, Chang Sichuan? Exactly. Han Yu said. Yang Jingrong dug a pit for herself and jumped into it unknowingly. Why do you say that? Han Yu answered, the Chang massacre at Sichuan. It tells the story of how Prime Minister Huangfu killed 500,000 rattan armored soldiers of the Changwu tribe at the Sichuan Plain with the help of black oil and fire before the establishment of the Xia dynasty. Everyone knows about this, but does Commandant Xie know the details of the battle that year? Xie's knowledge of Sichuan butchering Chang was limited to the history books. Could it be that there are other inside stories? It's not really the inside story, but it's more detailed. Han Yu said, the historical records are not wrong, but they are too brief. The Chengwu tribe was the ancestor of the northern borderline. Their horse-riding skills were top-notch. They galloped like the wind and were almost invincible. Their advantage was speed. Prime Minister Huangfu pretended to be defeated several times and sacrificed the lives of 20,000 soldiers to make the Chengwu tribe lose their composure. Only then did he lure them into the Sichuan Plain. This was only one of his many plans. If the news of our army was not as good as the cavalry of the Chengwu tribe, the cavalry of the Chengwu tribe would be able to gather and break out of the encirclement. In order to avoid this, the Prime Minister built a secret beacon in the Sichuan Plain. Later, when the world was settled, these beacon towers were either demolished or abandoned. Han Yu sneered. 2 years ago, Yang Jingrong represented his lord, Lu Shi, to form an alliance with the lord. For the sake of the overall situation, the lord and Ling Wengong joined forces to fight against Wuma Shang, the county chief of Shanghai County at that time. At that time they also fought to the Sichuan Plain. Yang Jingrong mentioned the beacon towers and reactivated the abandoned beacon towers to transmit information between the two places. Xie's eyes widened slightly. He could vaguely guess what Han Yu wanted to do. They could not catch up with Yang Xi's army, but the beacon towers could transmit information much faster than riding a horse at night. By igniting the beacon towers and gathering the troops stationed in the Sichuan Plain in advance, they could besiege or launch a sneak attack. Even if they could not kill Yang Si and the others, they could at least make them flee. Yang Si was still unaware of all this. It'll be dawn in less than an hour. Yang Si rode on the horse and secretly moved his position. After riding for a long time, his buttocks were a little numb from the jolting. The skin between his legs was also sore from the chafing. I'm afraid that no one in their 70s or 80s will ever forget this night. The temperature in the mountains was rather low. Yang Si clasped his hands together and breathed into his palms. He looked tired from a sleepless night. His expression was tired, but his mood was very cheerful. Qin Gong laughed. Last night, it was all thanks to the military counselor's divine foresight. Yang Si hummed a little tune, feeling a little pleased in his heart. Han Wenbin will definitely stomp his feet in anger at this moment. Before dawn, the army should be able to enter the border of the Sichuan Plain. Cheng Yuan said, according to Su Bei's reaction, it will take half a day for the news to reach Sichuan. There are few troops stationed there and the defense is not strong. We can take advantage of their unpreparedness and force our way out. The Sichuan Plain was not a plain in the truest sense of the word. There were gentle hills and crisscrossing rivers at the border. Because the terrain of the area was relatively flat and vast, the farmland was fertile and the grass was lush, it was also called the Sichuan Plain. Most of Jiang Pingji's troops were elites. Breaking through the encirclement on flat ground was a certain advantage for them. Yang Si was about to agree when his sharp eyes saw a small orange light in the distance. They were on higher ground than Han Yu's side, so they could see it more clearly. What is that? Yang Si frowned. Are you hallucinating? The orange light flashed and disappeared. After a while, Yang Si saw that another place was also emitting orange light. However, this time the orange light did not disappear. As if it was a relay, the orange light lit up again after a certain distance. The military counselor is not hallucinating. That seems to be a beacon? Beacon? Yang Si had a vague premonition in his heart. Looking at the direction of the beacon, it was clearly heading towards the Sichuan Plain. Sichuan Plain beacon? Beacon tower? An idea flashed in his mind. Yang Si suddenly remembered something and slapped his thigh, startling the purplish-red horse under him into neighing. Military counselor? Yang Si said, the entire army is moving quickly. If we don't leave now, I'm afraid we will be outflanked. It was one thing to catch the enemy off guard, but it was another thing to be caught off guard by the enemy. Yang Si secretly gritted his teeth and was full of remorse. If he could go back in time, he really wanted to go back to a few years ago and strangle himself for coming up with stupid ideas. Why did he dig a hole for no reason? He almost buried himself alive. The beacon could not only be seen by one's own people but also by the enemy. Before the sky was completely bright, the scouts found that the beacon was lit in Hu County and hurriedly passed the news to Jiang Pingji. There are still people playing with the beacon now? The outdated technology of the ancient times once again refreshed Jiang Pingji's limits. Can you determine where the fire beacons are coming from? As the Lord, Jiang Pingji could complain, but Wei Ci, Qiguan Rang and the others could not be so lazy. Chapter 1141. The scout reported, it should be the Sichuan Plain. The Sichuan Plain? Jiang Pingji was stunned when she heard this place. She had lived in the north for a long time and was unfamiliar with the Sichuan Plain. This place sounds familiar, she thought for a while and quickly found the relevant memory in her mind. Isn't the Sichuan Plain the main battlefield of the Chang massacre? Geographically speaking, the Sichuan Plain was easy to attack and difficult to defend. It had no other advantages except for its fertile soil. When Jiang Pingji and the officials discussed tactics, they almost neglected this place. Now that it was mentioned, she only remembered an allusion that she had read a long time ago. It's the battlefield of the Chang massacre, Wei Ci answered with a smile. Qiguan Rang, who was at the side, tensed up and hurriedly got up to look at the great universal geographical map. He looked at it carefully and suddenly discovered something. Jiang Pingji noticed his unusual behavior and asked, "What did Wenjing discover?" Qiguan Rang frowned and said with a heavy heart, "There must be something wrong when something is out of the ordinary. The Sichuan Plain is lit up. It should be a battle in Hu County. Su Fei has already been executed and the remnants of his troops have almost been wiped out. Even if they cause trouble, it's impossible to light the fire. Su Bei's family is the most powerful in Hu County. Who can cause such a scene? I think there's only one possibility." Everyone suddenly reacted. Jiang Pingji even crushed the teacup in her hand. The atmosphere in the tent was stagnant. The audience in the streaming room reacted half a beat slower. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Xu Shenyali, what happened? I'm most afraid of the atmosphere suddenly turning silent. I have a bad feeling about this. Zuyingxuan, the Sichuan Plain is lit up. Wenjing said a few words in the streamer and they became like this. Nyokodong Baojiang, my head hurts. Why can't they just finish what they want to say? They always leave the other half unsaid. Every time I watch the streaming room, a bunch of brain cells die. The key is that after the dead brain cells die, I still can't keep up with the rhythm. Biansong, I'm begging a big shot who is a language class representative. After all, it's a live streaming. If it's a TV series, I can rewind and find the key plot if I don't understand. Lady Bosch Chow Rue, I was a little confused at first, but after looking at my notes, I suddenly remembered something. The streamer lent Qin Gong 10,000 soldiers and horses to save Su Fei. She even let Yang Si and Qing Yuan supervise the troops. Bosch Qiguan had said that Hu County was Su Bei's territory. The remnants of Su Fei's troops could not stir up any waves. Only Qin Gong's troops could cause Su Bei to make a big move and ignite the flames of war. This was not difficult to analyze, but the time span in the live broadcast was too long. Many viewers did not remember what happened more than a month ago. There were only 850,000 seats in the livestream room. With billions of people fighting for the seats in the two dimensions, the flow of viewers was too high. Apart from a few internet superstars who were like big shots living in signal towers, almost no one could guarantee that they would stay in the live broadcast room every day. After the big shots analysis, the slow-witted audience was so shocked that they dropped the melon in their hands. Sangshuo Shijin, oh my, does this mean that Rongrong is in danger? For a moment Yang Xi's fans were in an uproar, and related topics quickly dominated the news. He had no choice but to be anxious. Yang Xi only had a total of 10,000 troops. If he stayed in the enemy's territory, wouldn't he be sending a fat chicken to his door? Yang Xi was not an NPC that could be respawned. He was a living person who lived in another plane, and he was their favorite idol. The livestream room also used a few years to tell the audience a bloody truth. War was cruel. If Yang Xi was going to die, he would really die. The audience was so anxious that they were burning with anger. Jiang Pingji threw the remains of the teacup aside with a calm expression and asked Qiguan Rang, "How many days is it from here to Sichuan Plain on foot?" "At least 3 days, at most 5 days. This number was already very optimistic. If they encountered any obstacles, they might be able to delay it for a few days. Jiang Pingji's eyes were slightly cold. Her left hand held the hilt of the god-slaying sword that hung on her waist. She said coldly, "Gather the troops. 10,000 is enough." After all, they were going to rescue people, not to fight head-on. If there were too many troops, it would be easy to delay them. Qiguan Rang suddenly raised his head and looked at her. The people under the tent stepped out to stop her. "My lord, we must not go deep into enemy territory alone. If something unexpected happens..." "Something unexpected happens?" Jiang Pingji sneered and said, "It's impossible." Qiguan Rang could not help but give Wei Xi a look. Feng Zhen, Feng Jin and the others were all at the rear. Currently, the strategists who followed the army were him and Wei Xi. Fear was one thing, but if Wei Xi could persuade his lord, it would be a good thing. Unbeknownst to them, Wei Xi was also feeling bitter. In his previous lives, he had been with his lord for decades. He was already very familiar with her. Once she made a decision, there was basically no room for discussion, unless... Wei Xi pondered in his heart and secretly gave Li Yun, Dian Yin and the others a look. Li Yun and the others were not as smart as Wei Xi and the others, but they were not stupid people. They were about to step out when Jiang Nongqin beat them to it. "I am willing to make a military pledge to bring back military advisor Yang and the others with my life." Li Yun and Dian Yin also stepped out one after another, unwilling to be outdone. "I am willing to go." To be honest, their lord personally led troops deep into the enemy's territory to rescue people. This action was touching, but at the same time, it was extremely painful. Why was it painful? If something unexpected happened to their lord and she did not have any children to inherit her will, they would not be able to fight. Speaking of which feudal lord's officials had suffered more than them? Which feudal lord did not have a lot of children, but their lord was special? She was still single and the young lord was nowhere to be seen. The more it was like this, the more pressure they as officials were under. Jiang Pingji was their lord and the most important core. Once she died, the whole power would fall apart. "Okay, Officer Jiang, come along." Jiang Pingji only agreed to let Jiang Nongqin follow, but she did not say that she would not go. Everyone was dumbfounded. "Be more courageous. The person who can kill me in this world has not been born yet," Jiang Pingji said helplessly. "I will return safely. My lord has made up your mind. I know I can't stop you. I only hope that my lord will put your health first and not take the risk to avoid falling into a dangerous situation." Wei Xi sighed in his heart. He knew he could not stop her. Whether it was in the previous life or this one, there were many such scenes. However, Wei Xi's compromise made Qiguan Rang unhappy. He secretly glanced at Wei Xi from the corner of his eye and frowned slightly. Everyone did not notice this detail, only Jiang Pingji did. "All of you can leave. Prepare immediately. Time cannot be delayed." She then added, "When Zheng stay." If it was in the past, Wei Xi would stay, but this time it was Qiguan Rang. "When Zheng should know why I want you to stay." She used a declarative tone. Qiguan Rang's heart was clear. He immediately guessed the answer. "For Zixiao?" Jiang Pingji said, "He can't stop me. I don't want Wen Zheng to be more fearful and dissatisfied with him because of this." Chapter 1142. Qiguan Gu was afraid of the beauty Wei Xi, and he seemed to be very dissatisfied. When did this happen? My lord, you don't have any doubts? Jiang Pingji knew what he was talking about. She smiled and said, Zixiao has a secret and it has something to do with me. Because of this secret, he came to me from 1,000 miles away and did his best to assist me. However, because the secret has not been made public, it is normal for Wen Zheng to have some doubts about him. If you want to know, I can tell you as long as you are willing to believe. Qiguan Rang was stunned for a moment, and then he returned to normal. No, my lord, it is enough that you know what to do. He shook his head. Although the grudge in his heart had not disappeared, it was not as heavy as before. My lord trusts Zixiao so much. If he dares to have second thoughts, I will be the first to not let him go. I will definitely eliminate him. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, Wen Zheng, you underestimate me. Qiguan Rang said seriously, It is not that I don't trust you, my lord, but... He paused and did not say the rest of his words. The love between a man and a woman could easily make people lose their minds. Otherwise, how could pillow talk be so effective? The audience was watching the show. Qiguan Gu was really a warrior to say something like, eliminate Wei Ci, in front of the streamer. Even if it was a show of loyalty, wasn't he afraid of being put in a difficult position in the future? Thinking of Qiguan Rang's usual low-key and cautious style, the audience unanimously believed that he was not a person who liked to court death. He dared to say so he must have a certain degree of confidence. For example, Jiang Pingji's trust in him was no less than her trust in Wei Ci. After the troops were organized, Jiang Pingji did not dare to delay and immediately set off with the troops. Yang Si accidentally dug a hole for himself and almost buried himself alive. Han Yu used the fire beacon to send a message to the troops stationed at Chichuan Plain. Before Yang Si and the others arrived at the border of Chichuan Plain, the troops stationed there had already organized their troops to intercept them. Yang Si gave up the idea of breaking through the encirclement. Breaking through the encirclement at this time would be courting death. The enemy was already prepared, and the effect of the sneak attack was far from what he expected. Even if he could successfully break through the encirclement, the delay would be enough for Han Yu to lead the troops to catch up. By then he would face the awkward dilemma of being outflanked. Instead of that, it was better to play hide and seek with them and delay time. Yang Si's rogue tactic had a term in the game, kiting. Qin Gong advocated breaking out of the encirclement, and so did Qing Yuan. No one wanted to sit back and wait for death. 2 against 1. Yang Si's decision seemed strange. Qin Gong was very respectful to Yang Si because of the sock puppet 5 tastes. Even if the two of them had different thoughts, he would still consult Yang Si seriously. Yang Si gave Qin Gong a look that said, You are worth teaching. He continued, Su Bei's troops aren't the only ones who can see the beacons on the Chichuan plains. Our lord can see them as well. Qin Gong was surprised. But military counselor, I don't think I've received any news from the lord recently. If they wanted to see the beacon fire, then their lord's army could not be far from Hu County. But Qin Gong didn't remember receiving any news about his lord's army. Yang Si smiled and said, Could it be that Fengjing has forgotten the declaration of war? Based on the distance the lord took to send the declaration, the distance should not be too far. Qin Gong's eyes lit up, as if he had opened the door to a new world. Qing Yuan asked, Military advisor Yang, are you saying that the lord will send troops to support us? Yang Si replied, Yes, there is at least a 60% chance of success. There are many shrewd men under the lord's command. How could they remain indifferent when they see the beacons on the Chichuan plains? I'm sure they can guess our predicament and will definitely send troops to support us. Before the arrival of the reinforcements, Yang Si had to preserve as much of his combat strength as possible. Perhaps they could even kill a wave of enemies. Yang Si's courage was greater than the heavens. They were already in a precarious situation, yet he could still optimistically think about killing the enemy. Qin Gong said awkwardly, However, the terrain of the Chichuan plains is flat. It's not easy to hide. Yang Si replied, You don't have to worry about that. I have my ways. As a result, Xieze lost track of the enemy halfway through the chase. The scouts searched several times but couldn't find any traces of the enemy's army. How could more than 10,000 people disappear into thin air? Could they have grown wings and taken to the sky as a group? The scout cursed in his heart and braced himself to pass the news to Han Yu and Xieze. They were about to catch up, but those bastards had disappeared without a trace. Han Yu pondered for a while and asked in a hoarse voice, Is there a river nearby? The scout thought for a while and said, There is indeed one. Is the river deep? How wide is it? The scout didn't go down to check, so he didn't know how deep the river was, but he knew its width. The river is more than 20 feet wide. I don't know how deep it is. Han Yu held back the blue veins that were throbbing and squeezed out an ugly smile. Go and check it out. Xie understood. The military counselor suspects that they crossed the river and hid their traces. Soon the scout came back to report the news. Because of the terrain, there wasn't much sand on the riverbed. The deepest part of the river was only as deep as an adult's chest. Han Yu said with a headache, using the water to escape. Yang Jingrong is really capable of anything. It wasn't winter or late autumn, so the river was cool. It would be nice to go for a swim. Search along the river and pay close attention to the beacons. Report to me as soon as you find any traces of the enemy. Unexpectedly, Yang Si didn't choose to break out of the encirclement. Instead, he avoided the soldiers stationed at the Sichuan plains and chose to hide. If it weren't for Han Yu's good upbringing, he would have scolded and cursed him harshly if it were someone else. Damn it. How shameless. Xie said, Don't be angry, military counselor. They are marching and swimming. They won't last long. At this pace they wouldn't even need to do anything. They would tire themselves to death. Han Yu looked serious. He thought that Yang Si must have something to rely on if he dared to do this. Colonel Qin, are you okay? Yang Si was a weak scholar. He didn't know how to swim, so he swam all the way with the help of the soldiers. Except for his wet clothes, he didn't look bad. In contrast, Qin Gong, a standard military general, looked a bit bad. He was panting, his cheeks were red, and his forehead was sweating. His wet clothes were sticky, but he couldn't take off his armor in case the enemy suddenly appeared and caught them off guard. I'm okay. Qin Gong adjusted his breathing and glanced at the other soldiers. After a little rest, they returned to normal. They seemed to be very familiar with such behavior. None of them complained. Yang Si saw through his mind at a glance. He smiled and said, My lord said that she would give you 10,000 elites. She won't cheat. After a short rest, the army set off again. They swam along the river at a very fast speed. The enemy couldn't catch up with them in a short time. Yang Si was thinking about what to do next. It would take time for the reinforcements of the Lord to arrive. He had to delay as much as possible. He would play hide and seek during the day and recuperate in the mountains at night. With a general idea, Yang Si was happy again. With his character, once he fell into the hands of the enemy, he would definitely be killed first and report later. Chapter 1143. Bah, those bastards are so good at running. The enemies were jumping up and down and they were running everywhere. They were about to surround them several times, but they just slipped away. It was fine if it was only once or twice, but it was the same every time. Han Yu and the others were calm, but the soldiers were getting impatient. Their anger was rising as if they had eaten a bomb. Stop talking. If Commandant Xie or military advisor Han hears you, they'll have to suffer because of you. When Han Yu mentioned Han Yu and Xie, his comrade finally stopped talking, but he didn't look good. He looked like a stone in a latrine pit. Although Han Yu didn't hear the sound himself, he could see that the morale of the army was getting lower and lower. Xie was anxious as he saw it. He really wondered if Yang Si and the others had installed a pair of windfire wheels under their feet and were playing with them everywhere. They were so close to catching turtles in a jar several times. They always got out of trouble in a way that was beyond ordinary people's normal thinking. Are they addicted to playing hide and seek? In contrast, Han Yu was much calmer. He didn't look anxious at all. Xie wanted to say it several times, but he swallowed it after a few hesitations. Until now, Xie finally couldn't bear it anymore. He frowned worriedly. Military Counselor Han, the morale of our soldiers is low. If this goes on, I'm afraid there will be trouble. In the long run? Han Yu asked. How long do you think this long run will last, Commandant Xie? Xie was stunned for a moment. He was about to blurt it out, but he suddenly realized something and couldn't help but be stunned. Han Yu was smiling, but his eyes were cold. His tone was as calm as ever, as if Yang Si's hide-and-seek and flying kites didn't cause him any confusion. He said, They are traveling light and can't carry much food. An army of more than 10,000 is not a small number, and the daily rations are an extremely large number. Even if everyone brings rations, how many days can one person carry? They were chasing from behind while Yang Si and the others were running in front. Because of the warning of the fire beacon, Yang Si and the others couldn't hide their tracks, so they couldn't stay in one place for too long. They could only keep changing positions, marching and hiding in order to avoid the scouts. Being tense and running for their lives for a long period of time had imperceptibly increased the soldiers' need for food and further depleted their morale. The rations that could support them for 4 to 5 days might not even last 2 days. Looking at the situation, it seemed that Yang Si was playing with them, but the first to collapse was definitely the side with a shortage of food. Yang Si and the others did not have the support of the grain line, so they would not be able to hold on for long. Either they were too hungry to fight, or they had to break out of the encirclement before starvation killed them. The two armies clashed head-on. Lieutenant Xie, you don't have to be anxious because your enemy is even more anxious than you. Han Yu was very patient. He exerted pressure on Yang Si and the others at a steady pace, forcing them to increase the frequency of their escape, which further increased their physical exhaustion. This was both a psychological attack and a competition of endurance between the two armies. Whoever lost their composure first would lose. Yang Si's combat style was bold and unrestrained. His thoughts were always different from others and he was somewhat imaginative. Han Yu, on the other hand, was steady and sure. He conformed to the rules, but he didn't stick to the traditional way of thinking. He was meticulous and steady, and he was very calm. Just as Han Yu expected, Yang Si's side encountered the predicament of food shortage, and they could only hold on for one more day. After that day they could only fill their stomachs with water for the rest of the time. Seeing this, Qin Gong's young face was dyed with worry. Lieutenant Qin, why are you so anxious? Looking at his pale little face, Yang Si couldn't bear to stand by and watch. He waved at Qin Gong, indicating that he should come over and rest, and not be so tense all the time. Come, sit down and talk. Here is a bag of water, drink it to quench your thirst. Qin Gong thanked Yang Si for his kindness. He was a general, and his physical fitness was much better than Yang Si, who was a scholar. At present, not only was there a shortage of food, but there was also a shortage of water. It was better to keep Yang Si's water bag for himself. Qin Gong couldn't help but say, Military Counselor Yang, you are really not anxious at all? Yang Si said, in a day or two we will run out of water and food. How can I not be anxious? Qin Gong carefully looked at his expression and said strangely, if Military Counselor is anxious, how can you be so calm? Yang Si asked in reply, is it possible that if I am anxious, food and water will appear out of thin air? Qin Gong, this was the first time he heard someone say the words broken jar in such a righteous and confident manner. Qin Gong said, there is a shortage of food and morale is shaken. In the end, won't we still become the enemy's turtles in a jar? Yang Si smiled as he looked at Inspector Cheng Yuan and said, it's true that there is a shortage of food, but the shaken morale is exaggerated. Qin Gong was stunned for a moment and suddenly realized something. For an ordinary army, even if there was only half a month left, the morale of the army would be in a state of collapse, much less a day's supply. As the food shortage approached, there would inevitably be soldiers who deserted or were afraid to fight. The longer time dragged on, the more deserters there would be. This was almost unavoidable. To give a ready-made example, Su Fei had been besieged in Mountain Urn City for several months. The water soldiers he had recruited were the first to escape. As time passed, their number reached more than 30,000. They fled in all directions, became bandits, and harmed the people. After that were the soldiers who were qualified to lead the army, and then the trusted troops. Those who were willing to stay and live and die with the army in times of danger were basically all loyal elites. Qin Gong had been tense for the past few days, and did not notice this for a while. The army of more than 10,000 had fled east and west for several days, and their food and fodder were getting increasingly scarce. The soldiers under them had not reported any deserters. This was simply impossible. Yang Si saw that he was in a trance, and the corner of his mouth curled up into a sneer. I have said before, my lord, that you are leading 10,000 elites. They must be genuine elites. Qin Gong's heart was touched, and he could not say a word for a long time. But, I have disappointed my lord. Qin Gong knew how rare it was to have 10,000 elites. They had all been built with a lot of money, food, and a lot of effort. Losing 10,000 at once, Qin Gong would not be able to make up for it even if he plucked off his own brain. What does this have to do with you? If you want to blame someone, blame Qiguan Wenjing. His declaration caught us off guard and we became the fish in the moat. Yang Si secretly grinned. If he was lucky enough to survive, he would definitely beat up Qiguan Rang's house and make him compensate. Qin Gong thought that Yang Si was comforting him, and he could not get rid of the guilt in his heart. He did not expect Jiang Pingji to place such high hopes on him right from the start. This trust made his heart feel sour but at the same time very warm. Qin Gong endured it and racked his brain to find another topic to talk about. For a general, there was no greater sense of accomplishment than training a fierce army of tigers and wolves. He wanted to know who trained these 10,000 elites behind him. This question was a little difficult. Everyone has a share. Yang Si said uncertainly, moreover, the birth of the elites is not all due to one person. Chapter 1144. Seeing that Qin Gong was puzzled, Yang Si couldn't help but give him the general knowledge of the Wanzhou group so that Qin Gong wouldn't make a fool of himself in the future. Why not? The so-called elite troops are no less than elite weapons. They also need elite soldiers, Yang Si said. Yang Si said, these elite soldiers not only have to be strong, brave and good at fighting, but they also have to be disciplined and obey orders. Only those who can do these two things can be called elite. Yang Si told Qin Gong about the tricks of training soldiers in the Wanzhou group. A strong body, brave and good at fighting, this is military strength. Strict discipline, strict execution of orders, this is military discipline. It was not difficult to do the former. There was only one word: train. Train to the death. The training plan that Jiang Pingji had formulated for her troops had been used to this day. The troops were trained in winter and summer when the weather was the worst. Whether it was in the heat of summer or the cold of winter, as long as they were not too sick to get up, they had to get up to train. After they had formed a certain level of strength, Jiang Pingji would also organize military exercises. Military exercises included various combat environments. Yang Si glanced at the resting troops and said lightly, not to mention that there's only 1 or 2 days of military rations left. Even if they run out of ammunition and rations for 7 or 8 days, they have to eat weeds and tree bark. Military exercises are like real battles. No one deserts then and no one will commit crimes now. Qin Gong was flabbergasted, but he had an urge to give it a try. He had never thought that training troops could be done this way. The so-called military exercises were real swords and spears, not putting on airs. But, with such harsh measures, why doesn't anyone desert? Although he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, Qin Gong could imagine the severity and cruelty of training troops after hearing Yang Si's description. The tyranny of the king and the rebellion of the people, yet none of these troops resisted or were dissatisfied. Qin Gong's attention was attracted by Yang Si's words. For a moment he forgot his previous worries. Yang Si smiled. Hardness is easy to break, softness is easy to bend. It's the same for training troops. Using both the carrot and the stick is the right way. Elites could not be trained hard. Not only did they need tough training methods, but they also needed a soft policy of appeasement. Soldiers were also human. They could not all be unparalleled loyal, and they could not be expected to use love to spontaneously pledge loyalty to Jiang Pingji. Yang Si pointed to the troops and said, for them, the price of deserting or being passive is far higher than dying in battle. Qin Gong was dumbfounded. What kind of technique was this? Yang Si stretched out 2 fingers and said, one is military discipline, and the other is welfare. Jiang Pingji had considered the issue of military discipline when she set up the army. She even put military discipline in the first place and formulated strict military rules. The soldiers were all peasants and almost none of them could read. It was very troublesome to talk to them about military rules and discipline. Jiang Pingji used the method of violent brainwashing. Regardless of whether it was winter or summer, she would shout about military rules and discipline 3 times a day in the morning, afternoon, and evening. Since the promotion of the new rhymes of Chinese, not only the common people were required to learn rhymes, but even the soldiers in the barracks had to learn them. Not only did he have to complete the regular training, but he also had to learn literacy from the political commissar. The position of political commissar was created by his lord, and he enjoyed the treatment of a centurion. His main job was to educate the soldiers' ideology. The primer was not the teaching material of the Golden Scale Academy, but the military rules that the soldiers were so familiar with that they could almost recite them backwards. As if brainwashing and education were not enough, Jiang Pingji also linked military discipline with pension benefits and retirement benefits. This move was extremely insidious. Once the soldiers violated military discipline, they would be directly recorded in their files. Not only would it affect the individual's salary and future promotion, but it would also affect retirement benefits or pension benefits for those who died in battle. Since the establishment of the Golden Scale Academy, these 2 benefits included the qualifications for future generations to go to school. This rule was too terrible. Under the use of both carrot and stick, which soldier dared to escape? For the sake of their families and children, they would rather starve to death in battle than violate military discipline and become deserters. Qin Gong was so shocked that he opened his mouth slightly. One sentence was written all over his face. Could it be played this way? Yang Si patted his shoulder. Qin Gong was still too young. Thi was shocked now. What would he do in the future? After resting for a while, the scouts found traces of the enemy and hurriedly sent the news back. Yang Si sighed softly. Enduring the pain all over his body, he stood up and said, "Colonel Qin, gather the troops and horses. Let's go." This long game of hide and seek, or cat and mouse, would be decided sooner or later. Another 2 days passed. Han Yu, who was originally calm, had a grave expression on his face. Yang Si and the others were still as slippery as before. They did not seem to be in distress due to the food shortage. The scouts also did not find any deserters. Could it be that his judgment was wrong? Did Yang Si take all his belongings with him to escape? If so, he should change his way of thinking and think again about what Yang Jingrong was up to. Someone quickly go and ask if there is any unusual movement at the border of Hu County. Something was not right. Everything was not right. He knew Yang Si's temperament very well. He would not get up early without benefits. He would never do meaningless things. If there were enough water and food, Yang Si would not stay in the Sichuan plain. It was a pure waste of time. He would have found a way to escape. Now he was still circling around the Sichuan plain. It was more like a cornered beast fighting. So, the question came back to itself. Did Yang Si lack food? If there was a shortage of food, how could he explain that there were no deserters and the marching speed was not reduced? If there was no shortage of food, Yang Si's actions puzzled him. Han Yu thought about it again and carefully connected the routes that Yang Si had escaped along these days. The routes were twisted and complicated. They seemed to be irregular, but they were all heading towards the northern border of Hu County. Report, the news has been found. The voice of the messenger interrupted his thoughts. Say it. The messenger said, Lu Shi divided his troops and attacked Hu County directly. Han Yu suddenly thought of something and accidentally knocked over the bamboo slips on the table. Yang Jingrong, you actually had this idea. It was not that Yang Si did not lack food. It was obvious that he had used a smokescreen to deceive others. Coincidentally, Xie found another place. Unfortunately, he was one step too late. Yang Si had already escaped with his troops. They escaped faster than a rabbit. Did Captain Xie check the remains of their bonfire? Han Yu asked. Xie said, yes. Han Yu asked, is there any trace of cooking? Xie thought back carefully, and a troubled expression appeared on his face. He had not noticed this. Han Yu went to the bonfire in person and was suddenly enlightened. The bonfire was messed up. It looked like the traces left by people fleeing in a hurry. In fact, it was to cover up the food that was not cooked. This is a good smokescreen, but it's a pity, Han Yu said decisively. Captain Xie, assemble the troops and go to Gusu. Gusu was located in the mountains north of the Sichuan plain. Xie was surprised. Counselor, are we not going to catch Yang Si? Catch him. Han Yu said, it's like catching a turtle in a jar. According to their own speed, they would definitely be able to reach Gusu before Yang Si and the others. The next day at noon, Yang Si and the others had been without food for 2 days. The soldiers were in good condition, but their combat power was less than half of the usual. At this time, Gusu was close at hand. If it is as I expected, I will be able to meet up with the master in half a day. Chapter 1145. Fengjing, tell everyone to be careful. I don't feel good about it. Yang Si looked around suspiciously. He had an inexplicable shadow in his heart, as if something bad was about to happen. Qin Gong said, okay, I will send the order to all the battalions to be on guard. Qing Yuan asked, did you notice anything wrong? Yang Si said, Gong Liao, who do you think our opponent is? Han Wenbin is one of Master Yuanjing's favorite students. It won't be easy to take advantage of him. Underestimating the enemy is a taboo for a military strategist. Underestimating the enemy will inevitably bring disaster to us. Send the order to the soldiers to be on guard. Don't relax at all times. We are not far from Gusu. Don't fail here. Because Cheng Cheng and Master Yuanjing were good friends, Qing Yuan could occasionally enjoy Master Yuanjing's guidance. In Qing Yuan's opinion, no matter how talented the knowledgeable old man was, it was not worth being surprised. The wind was blowing and the leaves and grass were rustling. Han Yu was wearing a black Confucian robe. His long hair was tied into a crown. He had lost a lot of weight after days of running around. The blue veins on his forehead were clearly visible. He put his hands behind his back and looked in a certain direction. He could faintly see more than 10,000 soldiers and horses rushing toward Gusu like squirming ants. Han Yu fixed his eyes on them and found that the ants had changed from their previous loose posture to a marching formation that could be used for both offense and defense. Xieze also noticed the change and said in surprise, "Counselor Han, have they already found out?" Han Yu said calmly, "If they found out, they would have turned around and left this troublesome place. Why would they walk right into the trap? If it were someone else, they would be so happy that they would let down their guard and reveal a fatal flaw. Yang Jingrong is different. He is a cautious and suspicious person. The more dangerous the situation is, the more suspicious he will be. This caution will let him linger on for a little longer." Xieze blinked and tilted his head to look at Han Yu's side profile. He always felt that his counselor did not hate Yang Si as much as he said. Not only did he not hate him, but he even considered him a confidant. However, the custom of the literati group was that the more confidant they were, the more ruthless they were. As a general, he could not understand it for the time being. "If we can capture Yang Si alive, you can try to persuade him," Xieze said. "People with different principles cannot make plans together. Yang Si's principles are different from yours. Besides..." Han Yu curled his lips into a sarcastic smile. "For Yang Si, there is no one in this world who is more suitable for him than Lu Lanting. If he is captured, only death awaits him." A look of confusion appeared on Xieze's face as he asked, "Why is that?" A fine bird chooses a good tree to nest in. Since Yang Si Ruo was captured, whether it was for his future or for his family's life, submitting to the new master was the best choice. The military counselor had previously said that Yang Si was not a stickler for rules. "In order to protect myself, what's wrong with seeking a new master?" Han Yu didn't intend to explain in detail. Yang Si was the son of a prostitute. His status was even lower than that of a lowly person. In the eyes of his lord, Su Bei, it was hard for him to enter the upper echelons of society. If Yang Si was not lucky enough to be carried away by Yuanjing, who lived in the folk, what would his fate be now? Either they had died a long time ago or they were just pimps that ran errands in brothels, waiting to be ordered around. Plot against the world and assist the feudal vassals? There was no need to even think about it. Yang Si's status was destined to not be put in an important position by Su Bei. He was also a sensitive and proud person, so he couldn't accept such humiliation. Han Yu knew him well, so he would give Yang Si a quick death. On the other side, the ominous premonition in Yang Si's heart was getting stronger and stronger. He was almost in a state of panic. Something's not right. It was a sunny day, but Yang Si broke out in a cold sweat. His hands were tightly gripping the reins. "Get into formation, turn around and return." By the time the order was given, half of the army had already passed through the lonely gorge. The hills on both sides were lush with trees, casting shadows. Yang Si's gaze was focused on the wild goose that was flying high in the sky. Qin Gong didn't doubt him and immediately gave the order. As soon as he gave the order, 2 flags with the words Su and Xie appeared on both sides. Yang Si saw an old acquaintance. "You don't have to leave now that you're here," Han Yu said condescendingly. "Jingrong, we haven't seen each other for a few months. How are you? How the F***ck?" Yang Si's face tightened, but he was swearing inelegantly in his heart. Han Yu wouldn't give Yang Si any time to react. The prepared rolling stones rolled down from both sides of the mountain path, and the arrows were like a tide. He had originally planned to destroy more than half of Yang Si's army, and then slowly nibble away the rest of the defeated soldiers. According to Han Yu's expectation, when half of the army was deep in the gorge, the front army would retreat in panic. It would definitely mess up the formation and cause a situation where people would crowd and block the mouth of the gorge. The front army couldn't retreat in time, and the rear army couldn't support, so the order would collapse. But Xieze was surprised. They are indeed elites. They can still maintain the formation at this moment. The military counselor said that they have been out of food for a couple of days. They should have low morale and no fighting power. Now that I look at them, they are not that bad. It's a pity to bury them here. Xieze didn't have the slightest intention of showing mercy, even though he said it was a pity. Countless rolling stones and hot oil splashed down, and screams resounded through the entire gorge. Xieze commanded the archers to shoot at the mouth of the gorge. The mouth of the gorge became the main target of the archers to destroy the support of the rear army and the retreat of the front army. Protect the military counselor. Qin Gong shot down the arrows that were rushing toward Yang Si, but he only had 2 hands. How could he compete with the hundreds of archers of the enemy? More than a dozen shield soldiers raised their shields and formed a formation. They used the shields to block the stray arrows and protected Yang Si and Qing Yuan in the chaos. Yang Si was in a mess. There was an arrow in his shoulder. If the arrow had been shot a little bit higher, it would have gone straight through his brain. Yang Si spat out a mouthful of blood and said, "Bah! I played with eagles all my life and I was almost pecked blind by an eagle." He let out a cry of pain and his whole face scrunched up because of the severe pain. Finally he swallowed it back. Qin Gong made sure that Yang Si and the others were safe, then he commanded the soldiers to form a formation and retreat. As long as they left the gorge they still had a chance of survival. Hot oil splashed. Rolling stones and arrows were blind. They didn't care who was who. Whoever was hit by the rolling stones would be the unlucky one. For a moment, no one knew how many soldiers were injured by the arrows and crushed by the rolling stones. Their bones turned into minced meat and blood. Xiaozhe said, "Get the bow." He knocked the bow and pulled the arrow, aiming at Qin Gong below. The soldiers were already in chaos and morale was shaken. Once the main general died, the army that was in a precarious situation would definitely collapse. The arrow pierced through the air and locked onto him as if it had eyes. Qin Gong felt a chill run down his spine, and a sense of danger rose to his head. He barely managed to shoot it down, but he couldn't dodge another stray arrow. The sharp arrowhead slashed across the side of his face, and blood stained his right eye. Chapter 1146. After leaving behind more than 3,000 corpses, Yang Si and the others retreated from the lonely gorge with the wounded soldiers. However, Yang Si did not feel the slightest joy of escaping because they did not have enough supplies. They were just struggling at death's door. If he were Han Yu, he would not let go of such a good opportunity. He would naturally take advantage of the situation to kill them. Qing Yuan supported Yang Si. He was already hungry. After this incident he was so weak that he almost could not stand. Yang Si endured the pain and said, "Gong Liao, go and tell Colonel Qin to immediately organize the uninjured soldiers and retreat quickly." Qing Yuan understood the other meaning. He resisted the urge to faint and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Military counselor! I will delay them for a while with the remaining troops." Yang Si was very calm. Even though he was in so much pain that he could not stand up straight, his mind was exceptionally clear. For a strategist, weighing the pros and cons was an innate instinct. Even if he had to sacrifice himself, he would not hesitate to do it in order to achieve the greatest benefit. "My lord, the reinforcements will arrive in less than half a day. We can't let these more than 10,000 elites be completely annihilated by the enemy." Under such circumstances, the outcome of staying behind to cover the retreat was definitely a dead end. Qing Yuan involuntarily grasped Yang Si's shoulder and helped him retreat a few steps. "If the military counselor dies, how will I explain it to my lord?" Qing Yuan was anxious at this moment. His hands, feet and brain did not feel like his own. It was not that he was useless. As a greenhorn, Qing Yuan had too little actual combat experience and accumulated too little experience. Yang Si could not help but grin. Qing Yuan was going crazy. He could still laugh in such a situation. "If I were alive, I would not have the face to see my lord." Yang Si smiled bitterly. He was too reckless and lost to Han Yu by one move. The elite troops that the lord had handed over to him were greatly damaged. How could he have the face to see Jiang Pengji? Qing Yuan's breathing became rapid and heavy. Yang Si held his wrist tightly. He never thought that Yang Si, who was thin and weak, would have such great strength. Yang Si pushed Qing Yuan away and the other party almost stumbled. "This is a military order. How dare you disobey? As a strategist, you are indecisive and can't make a decision in front of the battle. Do you want to kill more troops in the future?" It seemed to be deafening and Qing Yuan was shocked. "My lord may not come. It is better to fight with our lives on the line. Leaving Yang Si and more than 2,000 wounded soldiers behind would definitely kill them." Yang Si said firmly, "My lord will come." Qing Yuan gritted his teeth and passed the message to Qin Gong. Qin Gong thought for a while and ordered the troops to be divided. "My injuries are heavy. I don't want to be a burden, so I won't leave." Qin Gong's injuries were indeed very serious. There was a long gash on his face, 2 arrow wounds on his right arm, a saber wound on his left shoulder, and an injury on his leg. Fortunately, his leg injury was not serious. He could still ride a horse and fight again. The vanguard narrowly escaped from the call, but most of them were wounded and heavily injured. Almost all of them had to stay behind to cover the rear. The situation of the rear army was not bad. Although there were casualties, it was not serious. Their combat strength was still relatively intact. Han Yu and the others didn't give Yang Si much time. Their pursuers were right behind them. Yang Si took a deep breath and grabbed his sword with his blood-stained hand. If there is a next life, I will serve you as my master. Today, please forgive me for being a step ahead and being unable to be loyal, he murmured, already prepared to die. Yang Si knew his situation and choice better than Han Qin. If he was captured, he would die. Su Bei and Prince Changshu were birds of the same feather. They respected bloodline and family and despised the poor. However, the former was better looking than the latter and knew how to pretend to be peaceful. Yang Si jumped ship and kicked Prince Changshu out because of this. If he surrendered to Su Bei to protect himself, it would be a great humiliation for Yang Si. It was better than being ridiculed. Get into formation and fight the enemy. Yang Si waved his sword. He was unafraid of death. Report. Enemy attack from the rear. Han Qin was shocked. Enemy? So fast? In an instant he confirmed the identity of the attacker. He looked in the direction of the rear troops and could vaguely see that their formation had been disrupted. Xie was just about to lead his troops to kill the remnants of Yang Si's army when he suddenly heard the messenger's words. Enemy? Han Qin said, Yang Si's reinforcements. They had arrived 6 hours earlier than expected. They had thought that they would be able to get rid of the remnants of Yang Si's troops before retreating and making Lu Shi suffer a loss. Xie was stunned. Where did Yang Si's reinforcements come from? Han Qin said, Yang Si has been avoiding the battle. He led his troops to Chichuan Plain in order to save his troops and meet up with the reinforcements. If they break out on their own, more than half of them will die. If the reinforcements come, they can at least preserve their strength and deter our army. Unfortunately, Yang Si's wishful thinking was completely disrupted by Han Qin. Xie was puzzled. Our army did not intercept their letter. How could the reinforcements come so coincidentally? Han Qin said, Fire beacon. Because of the fire beacon, Lu Shi guessed that Yang Si was in trouble. It was not surprising that he sent reinforcements. Xie immediately understood and asked, Counselor, what should we do now? Han Qin said, It is not advisable to fight. If it was a frontal battle, there was no need to panic. But the reinforcements attacked from the rear and disrupted their formation. They could not organize an effective resistance for a while. The longer they waited, the more casualties they would suffer. If Yang Si reacted and cooperated with the reinforcements to attack them from both sides, the situation would be even more disadvantageous. Han Yu made up his mind in a split second. Han Qin and Yang Si had similar temperaments. Both of them were decisive and ruthless people. Once they made a decision, they would not hesitate. If it was someone else, they would insist and beat Yang Si to death even if it was a risk because there was no other way out. If Han Qin really did that, the troops he led would definitely be swallowed by Jiang Pingji, and no one would be left alive. Yang Si was trying his best to kill as many enemies as he could before he died, but he found that the enemy was gone. Counselor, the enemy's rear army is in chaos. Qin Gong was riding a horse. His vision was much higher than Yang Si's. He could vaguely see the enemy's rear army being destroyed by the unfamiliar forces. Yang Si was stunned for a moment. He was so stunned that he almost couldn't react. My lord's reinforcements. Yang Si dropped his sword excitedly. He was so happy that his wound was torn. He cried out in pain. Qin Gong's heart skipped a beat. Reinforcements? Were there really reinforcements? What they didn't know was that Jiang Pingji, the reinforcements they were talking about, was in a bad mood. The audience in the streaming room could feel the surging killing intent from her. The screen that was full of bullet screens was now empty. Everyone was so scared that they did not dare to speak. Want to escape? Little white maid. Jiang Pingji suddenly pulled out the God Slayer from her waist. The bright snow-white blade was shining with a cold light. Chapter 1147. Lieutenant Xie, sound the gongs to retreat. Han Yu didn't hesitate at all. He even gave up the meat that was about to be in his mouth and let Yang Si go. Xie was leading his men to kill the enemy when he suddenly received such an order. His emotions fluctuated greatly and he almost vomited blood. The deputy general was so excited that his eyes were bloodshot. He blurted out, "The advisor is confused." Xie gritted his teeth and chose to follow Han Yu's judgment. He gave the order to retreat. The military advisor must have his reasons for doing this. We just have to follow his orders. Xie's face was taut, his eyes stained with blood from the killing. No matter how dissatisfied I am, military orders must be obeyed. How can I question them now? Don't say anything more. Retreat, retreat. The deputy general was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. Although the position of a military advisor had the right to supervise military affairs, to put it bluntly, it was just an official subordinate to the general. It was mostly an advisor who mainly came up with ideas and strategies. The strategists under different vassals were also different. Some were just staff officers with no military power, some had partial military power, and some were under the command of the Jinha strategists who were in charge of the entire army. Han Yu wasn't an ordinary military advisor, but Su Bei didn't completely delegate his authority to Han Yu to be a military advisor. In short, Xie Zhe, as the commander-in-chief, did not need to listen to Han Yu. "Big brother, can't you have your own opinion?" The deputy general was furious with Xie Zhe, but he didn't dare to disobey orders and could only choose to retreat. Only when he retreated did he realize that his rear army was almost completely routed by the enemy. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. How many enemies had ambushed them? 10,000 or 20,000? In fact, Jiang Pingji had only brought 3,000 troops and horses with her to provide support. The remaining 7,000 troops were still on their way and would take about 15 minutes to arrive. Seeing with her own eyes the bloody corpses, rolling stones, arrowheads, and burning oil that littered the ground of the lonely forest canyon, her anger soared to the breaking point. "My lord, there are less than 10,000 corpses in the valley. Many of the corpses are still warm. It can be seen that the tragic battle happened not long ago." Jiang Nongqin's face was solemn as well. Her eyebrows were tightly knitted, and her cold eyes were emotionless. "My lord, please send me to lead the troops to chase after them." Jiang Pingji sneered and said, "No need, I'll go." Thus, she took 3,000 people with her and left at the fastest speed possible. What was embarrassing was that the 3,000 soldiers were unable to catch up to Whitey, who was galloping at full speed. They were left behind by Whitey by several hundred feet. She didn't care about the enemy's front and rear armies. She attacked as soon as she saw them and didn't show any mercy. Jiang Pingji's expression was unprecedentedly gloomy. There was almost no pause in the God Slayer. Whenever the blade lit up, it would definitely reap a few lives. Quang! There was a dull sound of collision as the enemy's rear army reacted and tried to block with their swords and shields. Jiang Pengji exerted some force with her wrist, and the few tiger-headed bronze shields were cut in half by the God Slayer. The cut was smooth and neat. Little White raised its hooves and stomped on the enemy soldiers, taking away the stupefied shield-bearers. The blade of the God-slaying saber was still as shiny as new. There was not a single crack or scratch on it. Courting death, Jiang Pingji had already rushed into the enemy's formation. In such a situation, the enemy would always attack the mount first. Dozens of soldiers hid behind the shield wall. They held long spears in their hands and stabbed at Little White, who was under Jiang Pingji. From the enemy's point of view, Little White was her mount. Even if she didn't lose any of her riding gear and armor, if she was really stabbed by the long spear, she would definitely lose control due to the pain and indirectly affect Jiang Pingji, who was on the horse. As long as she fell off the horse, could the silver-armored young general fly into the sky? Little did they know that someone had been in the sky and had never come down. Their intentions were seen through by Jiang Pingji. With a twist of her wrist, the god-slaying saber turned over. She was as fast as a ghost. The blade cut off all the horizontal and straight blades on the long spear, leaving only a smooth piece of wood. The speed of the wood did not decrease. It stabbed the fish-scale armor on Little White's body. It was like a normal person walking on the street who was suddenly hit by a stick. Little White snorted in pain. His anger soared, and he went on a rampage even more ferociously. His hooves added more souls to his body. Kill! Jiang Pingji rushed dozens of feet into the enemy's formation before the 3,000 troops arrived. When the enemies met, their eyes turned red. When the two sides fought, it was a life-and-death battle. Their battle cries soared to the sky. The morale of Jiang Pingji's side was like a rainbow. They attacked the enemy's rear army and had the advantage of surprise. The enemy was caught unprepared. Jiang Pingji's performance was too dazzling. She single-handedly stirred up one side and caused the enemy's formation to collapse. The soldiers under her command were already full of anger. When they saw their former comrades die in the lonely gorge, their anger was added to their grief and indignation. Now all these emotions had turned into hostility. With only 3,000 troops, they had defeated the enemy's rear army of 7,000. Jiang Pingji alone had slaughtered countless people. The god-slaying saber in her hand was full of human blood. It looked even colder and more terrifying. Who on earth is that? Deputy General Xie Zhe was scared out of his wits. He had no time to complain about Xie Zhe's obedience to Han Yu's orders. Yes, Xie Zhe. How would Xie Zhe answer? Han Yu was very far away. He could only see a vague figure, but he was very familiar with the figure. Suddenly Han Yu clenched his fists tightly. When he saw through Yang Xi's plan, he knew that Wanzhou would send reinforcements to support Yang Xi. But he never thought that the reinforcements would be Lu Shi. In order to save his subordinates, a feudal lord risked his life and went into battle. He didn't know if Yang Xi was lucky or unlucky. It was not a good thing for the plotters to have such an emotional lord. But Han Yu felt a little envious of Yang Xi. Lieutenant Xie mobilized the archers. We must kill that silver-armored soldier. The biggest disadvantage of Jiang Pingji's side was the lack of long-range forces. After all, they were rushing to rescue the soldiers and provide support, so they couldn't bring a lot of supplies and machinery. Xie did as he was told without any hesitation. Yang Xi was the first to notice the movement on Han Yu's side. He was so angry that his whole face turned pale. Han Wenbin had already recognized the lord. Lieutenant Qin, quickly go and protect the lord. Mobilize the troops to contain the enemy's central army. We can't let Han Wenbin's wishful thinking succeed. Qin Gong immediately responded and rushed out on his horse. His reaction was a little slow. He finally realized what Yang Xi had said. Protect the lord? Wait, the lord is here? Qin Gong looked cold and ruthless, but his heart was trembling with fear. Qin Gong couldn't be blamed for not recognizing Jiang Pingji. Generally speaking, he had only seen Jiang Pingji twice. Both times, Jiang Pingji had appeared in women's clothing. Anyone who was not blind would not be able to mistake her gender. Now she had changed into men's clothing. She was wearing a dignified and heavy armor. She also had an aura of 2.8 meters. Killing people was like cutting vegetables. It would be strange if Qin Gong could not recognize her. After the shock, Qin Gong was touched and worried. He was afraid that something bad would happen to Jiang Pingji. Chapter 1148. Qin Gong was so anxious that he ignored his injuries and rushed toward Jiang Pingji with his troops. Before he arrived, the sky was filled with arrows. They were all aimed at the people around Jiang Pingji. My lord, Qin Gong was so anxious that he yelled and pulled at his wounds. If he was hit by the arrows, he would be seriously injured even if he didn't die. Jiang Pingji snorted and put the god slayer back into its sheath. She grabbed two enemies by the neck and used them as meat shields. Little White also cleverly escaped into the crowd and charged around, using them as meat targets. She threw away the two dead bodies and unsheathed the god slayer again to clean up the surrounding enemies. Little White came back. Jiang Pingji grabbed its reins and mounted the horse again. While galloping, the blade cut off several people's necks as if it was cutting wheat. Little White rushed out of the shooting range of the arrows with Jiang Pingji on his back. He made a detour to the other side. It was an accurate, dangerous, and exciting maneuver, but Jiang Pingji didn't change her expression. She killed the people in front of her and cut the horses in front of her. Qin Gong was speechless. He didn't believe it was his lord. The military counselor must have made a mistake. Qin Gong's mind was in a mess, but he still maintained a cold expression and looked very calm. On the other side, Xie saw that the arrows didn't work, so he asked Han Yu, military counselor, the silver-armored general seems to be fine. Should we? Han Yu said decisively, the opportunity is gone. Don't waste your time. Retreat. Opportunities on the battlefield were fleeting. It was Han Yu's fault that he didn't seize the opportunity. Xie pursed his lips. He could only act according to the plan and suppress his curiosity. What was the silver-armored general's identity? The military counselor changed his mind at the last minute. It showed that the silver-armored general's status was not low. He was at least a core figure. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been worth the military counselor's attention. Xie admired Han Yu from the bottom of his heart, but the lieutenant next to him was full of resentment. Han Yu was not the military counselor who had total military power. Han Yu and Xie shared half of the military power. Han Yu was just a civilian who gave advice and suggestions. How could he order Xie around and change the military order at the last minute? The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. He couldn't help but blame the failure of the mission on Han Yu. Han Yu made a big fuss but didn't gain much. He finally got the upper hand, but he changed his mind and withdrew his troops at the last minute. What was he trying to do? As they retreated, Xie couldn't help but ask his own question. Counselor, just who is that silver-armored young general? Xie had studied the generals under Jiang Pingji's tent. At first he suspected that the silver-armored general was Li Yun. However, Li Yun only used a long spear. He had heard that his spear technique was superb, almost as good as the Xie family's heirloom. Could it be that not only was Li Yun adept at using the spear, he was also an expert with the saber? Han Yu was still regretting that he had missed such a good opportunity. He asked Xieze, "Guess who that person is?" Xieze said, "I personally thought it was Li Yun, but I'm not sure. Moreover, if it were Li Yun, Han Yu would not think so highly of him." Li Yun was Jiang Pingji's military general, but he was not irreplaceable. Even Fu Wang did not have this weight. Xieze racked his brains but could not think of Jiang Pingji as the target. Han Yu said, "That is Lu Shi." Xieze nodded and said, "Oh, so it is Lu Shi." Lu, he was dumbfounded. Whose name did he just hear? The enemy's vassal Lu Lanting. What a pity. Han Yu's words were full of pity. It was not a big deal to kill a general on the battlefield. If the enemy's leader was killed, the forces in Wanzhou would be in chaos and the Lord would not have to worry anymore. Oh, Lu Shi? Xieze almost bit his tongue. That silver-armored young general was Lu Shi? Han Yu said, "What else? It's a pity that he did not kill her. I'm afraid there will not be such a good opportunity in the future." Xieze felt that his worldview had been turned upside down. Who would have thought that a vassal would at most be in the middle of the army? Why would he personally fight with a sword? It's a pity that such a vassal did not become a general. Xieze told a lame joke, but Han Yu was not in the mood to laugh. No one would feel good if all their efforts were in vain. Xieze said, "This is my fault. You don't have to blame yourself. It was the duty of a military counselor to give advice, but it was his job to kill the enemy. It must be his fault that he failed to kill Lu Shi." Han Yu shook his head. His face, which was already much thinner, looked a little gloomy and cold. Since Han Yu had given the order immediately, they did not suffer many casualties. They ran away faster than rabbits. Jiang Pingji chased for a while and killed more than 100 people. In the end, she could only look at the dust that was raised by the enemy and grit her teeth. The battle had just ended, and Jiang Nongqin had already arrived with the remaining troops. She did not see Jiang Pingji. She first saw Yang Si, who was pale and had lost a lot of blood. He was sitting on a rock, dispirited. "Is the military counselor injured?" Jiang Nongqin asked. Then she changed the topic to Jiang Pingji. "Where is the Lord now?" As she spoke, she asked the female medics who had followed the army to come forward. The two sturdy female soldiers walked forward with medical boxes on their backs. If it were not for their figures, people would not be able to tell that they were women. Yang Si tried to lift his arm, but the arrow wound was pulled. He grimaced in pain. The female soldier looked at the wound and said, "The arrow wound is a little deep. You have to take off your clothes. Does the military counselor want someone to cover you with a cloth?" The corner of Yang Si's mouth twitched. No, he was a man, but he still had to be bashful when looking at the wound. He always felt that his manliness was inferior to the female soldiers in front of him. The female soldier took out a pair of big scissors and cut open his clothes, revealing the location of the arrow wound. Fortunately, the arrowhead was not rusty or poisoned. If it was treated well and cared for carefully, the possibility of infection and pus was relatively low. The female soldier treated the wound and applied anesthetic. She waited for the effect to spread before she pulled out the arrow. "Forget it. Let me do it." Although there was anesthetic, it was still painful. The female soldier did not dare to use too much force, which made Yang Si feel even more pain. Jiang Nongqin, who was standing at the side, could not stand it anymore. She took the initiative to help. Yang Si was about to modestly decline, but she pressed his shoulder with one hand and pulled out the arrow with the other. Without giving him any time to prepare, he felt a sharp pain coming from his shoulder. Yang Si could not help but curse in his heart again. Jiang Nongqin said to the female soldier coldly, "Apply medicine to the military counselor to stop the bleeding. Don't leave any hidden dangers." Due to the years of war, the surgical skills of the medics were improving day by day. Now they could organize a set of rough surgical manuals. Yang Si's forehead was covered in cold sweat. If he had not gritted his teeth and persevered, he might have fainted from the pain. "Officer Jiang, you're a girl after all. Can you be gentle occasionally?" Yang Si could not help but complain. In the end, Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes coldly. "There is no distinction between men and women on the battlefield in the army camp. If there is, it's a brothel," she said. "We female soldiers do not need such things as gentleness." Yang Si choked back his words and became more energetic. Qin Gong, who was at the side, was a little scared. He was more familiar with Yang Si and had never seen Jiang Nongqin before. At that moment he could not interrupt. Chapter 1149. Yang Si squinted his eyes and barely saw Jiang Pingji coming against the light. He endured the pain and used his uninjured hand to prop himself up from the stone under him. Jiang Nongqin helped him up when she saw this. "Sinner Yang Si greets my lord." Yang Si took a few steps forward, but Jiang Pingji had already galloped forward. She got off the horse and lifted Yang Si up with one hand. "What do you mean by sinner?" Jiang Pingji furrowed her brows tightly. She stared at the white cloth tied around his shoulder. Because Yang Si moved a little too much, the wound that had just stopped bleeding split open again. Spots of bright red slowly seeped out and dyed the area red. Yang Si's face was pale and he said with shame, "Sinner, I misled the command and caused thousands of soldiers to lose their lives in Gushu." Jiang Pingji thought it was something serious, but he was not to be blamed for it. A fool is bound to gain something from 1,000 considerations. A wise man is bound to make a mistake from 1,000 considerations. Yang Si was a human being, not the brain of heaven. No, even the brain of heaven had made mistakes before, let alone a human being. At the end of the day, it was not Yang Si's fault. He could only blame the enemy for being better than him. He, on the other hand, obediently went to take the blame. How can there be no deaths in war? Jiang Pingji was distressed that thousands of elites had died, but it was not a reason to push the blame to others and shirk responsibility. Yang Si's lips opened and closed for a long time. His bloodshot eyes were glistening with tears, which made the bystanders feel sad. "You have tried your best to deal with the enemy and even saved most of the troops. Why should I blame you?" Jiang Pingji said helplessly, "If you feel guilty, then take good care of your injuries. You suffered a loss in Han Yu's hands this time. Next time you will get back at him." Yang Si stopped the losses in time and saved more than 6,000 of the 10,000 elites. Most of the casualties were in Gushu Gorge. Who could say that Yang Si had done nothing wrong by being able to retreat under such circumstances? Jiang Pingji looked at Qin Gong and said, "Officer Qin was seriously injured. Why didn't you let the medical soldiers treat him?" In ancient times, the medical skills were backward. In her era, a missing arm or a broken leg could be regrown in minutes, but it was not possible here. Although Qin Gong did not lose an arm or a leg, the wounds on his body were still quite terrifying. There was even a palm-long cut on his face. Suddenly being called out by Jiang Pingji, Qin Gong came back to his senses. My lord," Qin Gong called out. His mind was still in a mess, so he suddenly became speechless and didn't know what to say. Jiang Pingji said calmly, "We'll talk about it later. Field Officer Qin, go and tend to your wounds first to prevent excessive blood loss." Qin Gong thought that he would be reprimanded like a storm, but it turned out to be a warm and caring one, scaring him into a daze. Qin Gong was used to being a capricious lord like Su Fei. He had already mentally prepared himself to be the scapegoat in 72 different ways. No matter what the reason was, it was an indisputable fact that Qin Gong had lost 40% of his troops. If the lord flew into a rage because of this and used military law to punish him, he would have no complaints. Fortunately, Jiang Pingji did not know what Qin Gong was thinking. If she did, she would have rolled her eyes. Was she the kind of lord who did not distinguish between right and wrong? "My lord, let Gong Liao lead the remaining troops and evacuate first." Yang Si slowly sat back on the huge rock and secretly took a deep breath to suppress the pain of his wound. "Gong Liao still doesn't know that my lord has arrived with reinforcements. Can you send a messenger to summon him back?" Jiang Pingji joked, "Of course. Otherwise, Gong Liao will run in the wrong direction and into the enemy's lair." At that moment, Jiang Pingji sent a messenger to chase after Qing Yuan. Qing Yuan was a little confused at first. He grabbed the messenger and asked 3 or 4 times before he accepted the surprise. He who was originally steady suddenly broke down. He looked like he was crying and laughing at the same time. "God bless my lord. God bless our army." After the ecstasy, Qing Yuan asked about Yang Si and Qin Gong's situation in detail. When he learned that they were still alive, Qing Yuan almost cried with joy. He hurriedly gathered his troops and horses and returned along the original path. When he was fleeing, his heart was as heavy as a mountain. All kinds of negative emotions weighed down on him, making it hard for him to breathe. When he went, Qing Yuan wished he could install a pair of wind and fire wheels under his feet. He flew over with a swish. He galloped on his horse, his sleeves blowing in the wind, and the hairband that bound his hair fluttered non-stop. When he arrived with his troops, the simple and crude camp had already been set up. Pots were set up on piles of bonfires, and a variety of food was bubbling in the pots. The aroma of food drifted into everyone's nostrils, tempting their stomachs to growl like thunder. The surviving soldiers were very hungry. They didn't care that the white rice had just come out of the oven. They opened their mouths and wanted to eat it. The boiling hot rice rolled in their mouths a few times, scalding them until they shivered. Their tongues were scalded until they were red, but they couldn't bear to spit it out. Instead they swallowed it whole. The heat rolled along their mouths and into their mouths. It was scalding, warm, and satisfying. Many people had already burst into tears. They hugged their bowls and sobbed. Some people were so anxious that they grabbed the rice with their hands. After crying for a while, they laughed. These days they drank water to fill their stomachs and ate weeds and tree bark. They were so hungry that they could only tighten their belts. The group of people were so hungry that their eyes were glowing. Yang Si was the same, but he had encountered a rather awkward accident. His entire right arm was wrapped tightly and hung in front of his chest. It was very unnatural for him to use chopsticks with his left hand. He could still pick up the large ones if he was not awkward. However, he could not pick up the small ones no matter how hard he tried. Sigh. I hate that I'm not Zixiao. Yang Si was envious for a while and put down his chopsticks unhappily. Wei Si's left and right hands were very agile. Writing with his left hand was comparable to using his right hand. When handling official documents, he also used both hands at the same time. Such a unique skill could not be learned by ordinary people. As he was thinking, a wooden spoon appeared in front of him. Thank you, Colonel Jiang. Yang Si was somewhat flattered. This female colonel was usually very cold. Apart from his lord, there was no one else in her eyes. Yang Si had never dared to provoke such a person. For her to condescend to give him a spoon, it was as if the sun had risen from the west. You're welcome. It's not convenient for the military counselor to use chopsticks. I'm afraid that I'll be disrespectful in front of the Lord. Yang Si was speechless. Haha, the sun still rose from the east today. This unapproachable colonel could not stop talking about the Lord. Yang Si could not help but mutter. Jiang Nongqin, who had sharp ears, could faintly hear her own name. Military counselor? Yang Si coughed softly. He scooped up the spoon and ate his meal, avoiding Jiang Nongqin. However, Jiang Pingji heard what Yang Si said. She glanced at Jiang Nongqin. Her face was as calm as a mountain, but she secretly thought to herself. While Jiang Pingji was eating, the frightened audience quietly poked their heads out. Finally, a few sporadic bullet screens appeared on the blank screen. Xinjia, excuse me, can I send bullet screens now? Naji, should be able to? The audience from the two dimensions cried like a storm in their hearts. Even though they were separated by a dimension, the murderous aura made them tremble. Chapter 1150. The little princess in the livestream room was shocked. Some of the old fans in the live broadcast room could not take it anymore, let alone the newcomers. Ping Qiu, I'm a newbie in the live streaming room. This is the first time I've gotten a spot. In the past, he had always heard people say that Zhang Bapi had an aura of 2.8 meters and that even the king of hell would be afraid of him when he glared at him. At that time, he had thought that it was a sensational story. No matter how strong the aura is, can it be stronger than my Jiang? Now that I've seen it for myself, it really lives up to its name. My Jiang was instantly crushed. The QAQ streamer's aura is more than 2.8 meters. It's clearly the distance between two dimensions. Zhu Xiao, you're Jiang? Oh, the popular actress who imitates the streamer's character and keeps on King the Queen? Duan Lu? Tisk, that Xiao Hua who changed her name to Pingxi streamer. Let's not talk about her. My streamer always likes to speak with facts. She won't use tricks like drinking, eating, and sleeping with people to get ahead. There were so many problems in the entertainment industry. There would always be people who did not learn their lessons. Jiang Pingji streaming room had been around for many years, and its popularity was always at the top of the charts. In the early years, many newcomers in the entertainment industry would copy the characters in the live broadcast room and rely on that to become popular. However, setting up a person's persona was not something that could be easily messed up. Not to mention there was still the main body in front of him. Even so, there were still many people who chose this path in order to take a shortcut. As the lord with the most fans in the streaming room, Jiang Pingji naturally had the most fans. However, her fan group was toxic. There were too many big shots from all walks of life. Many young stars who imitated Jiang Pingji's persona were defeated by them. As time passed, the newcomers didn't dare to do it again. Yiwu Yanling, what? Which unsightly flower came out to blackmail the host again? Can you imitate the host's aura? Xinyue, I'm going to beat it up. With these topics, the audience's taut nerves finally relaxed. Seeing that the limelight had passed, the audience slowly returned to the joking atmosphere from before. There were too many topics for them to talk about and they had been holding it in just now. If it wasn't for the tense atmosphere, they would have flooded the screen with bullet screens. Women's harms, Qin Gong, let me hug you and comfort you. Even if you're disfigured, you're still the fattest. Blooming thorns, Qin Gong's wound is very dangerous. If it was a little more to the side he might be the next Xiahou Dun. Because of Xiezhe's arrow, Qin Gong was injured by a stray arrow, and a palm-sized wound appeared on his face. The wound was a little deep and could easily leave a scar. However, Qin Gong did not mind. He was a man and a general at that. Scars were the best medals. Wukong Daodu, I even asked for a protective talisman for Rongrong. Ah, sure enough, a scourge lives for 1,000 years. The host has come at the right time. Huan Sun Fangchao de Gui Qi, Sai, it's not exactly in time. If it was a few hours earlier, more than 3,000 casualties could have been avoided. Speaking of the tragic battle in the Lonely Hill Canyon, the hearts of the spectators became much heavier. Jiang Pingji was a qualified streamer. She streamed live every day. Her influence and her team were built up through the eyes of the audience. They put themselves in Jiang Pingji's shoes, and the soldiers were their blood and sweat. With so many casualties, how could he not feel heartache? However, as Jiang Pingji had said, how could there be no deaths in war? They only hoped that the chaotic world would end soon, so that they could happily accompany Jiang Pingji to watch the show. Jiang Pingji's originally relaxed mood suddenly sank a little when she saw the bullet screen. Yang Si called himself a sinner. He did not know that Jiang Pingji also blamed herself, but she did not show it. She felt a little sad emotionally, but her rationality told her that the soldiers had died for a reason. Their deaths had brought about the situation that Jiang Pingji wanted the most. Perhaps she had been assimilated into the ancient times. If it was her in the past, she would not even bat an eyelid. She finished eating without changing her expression. Jiang Pingji glanced at a few bullet screen comments. Xiaoshui Wushuang, let me ask you weakly. Didn't you notice that the host's weapon is a little strange? Lao Siji Lianming, it's indeed very strange. The style of the knife is somewhat like a tang knife. I can't tell the material, but its hardness is definitely more terrifying than the well-tempered steel that we know. I just went to the Chieba forum and found the recording of today's stream. I dragged it back to watch it and found a very shocking fact. The host used her knife to easily cut through several tiger-headed bronze shields. Needless to say, she cut through several people's bodies with one knife. We can't even achieve this level of knife craftsmanship in our era. Do you think the host can do it in this era? The onlookers saw that Jiang Pingji was unstoppable. Apart from double-clicking 666, she basically did nothing else. Those big shots were different. Their focus was different from ordinary people. The knife in Jiang Pingji's hand was obviously unusually strong. Wu Yueshue, could it be alien technology? Tangerine soft candy, maybe it was made by a cultivator? Shimoning, could it be that a super powerful person saw that the host needed to change her knife every time she fought and couldn't help but mail her one? The onlookers used their own black holes of imagination. Some people integrated their imaginations into a story with a beginning and an end. Sankei, haha, maybe the host has a super terrifying backer. This backer is a super powerful person from the cultivation world. He pitted the host for having to change her weapon every time she fought, so he couldn't help but use alien technology to make a plug-in weapon for her? Jiang Pingji looked coldly at the onlookers as they let their imaginations run wild. She thought that it was scary enough that Wei Ci guessed that she was a man in her previous life, until she met the onlookers in the streaming room. She was still too young. However, the origin of the God Slayer was indeed a mystery. She didn't want to explain it, so she let them make wild guesses. The name list of those who died in the war must be sorted out as soon as possible. Add another layer of compensation. Jiang Pingji paused and added, they died for me. I can't just leave their corpses in a foreign land. Collect their corpses properly tomorrow. This matter cannot be neglected. Yes. Everyone responded. Jiang Pingji continued, Jing Rong, it's been hard on you these days. More than 10,000 troops had penetrated deep into the enemy's territory. It was already a great achievement for Yang Si to react quickly and preserve most of his troops. More importantly, they now had sufficient reason to attack Su Pei. She would repay him tenfold in the future for how many of her soldiers were injured by Su Pei today. Little did she know that Su Pei was sitting on pins and needles. While Jiang Pingji was reorganizing her troops, Han Yu led his troops back to Shanwu City. Su Pei thought that Han Yu would return in 1 or 2 days. He didn't expect that he would be delayed for so long. In the end, he didn't get what he wanted. They didn't manage to wipe out the enemy. There was a gap between reality and his imagination. Su Pei was in a bad mood, but he didn't show it on his face. Not only did he not blame Han Yu and Xie Zhe, but he also rewarded them greatly and organized a banquet for them. Han Yu had something he wanted to say to Su Pei, but there were too many people around. He could only restrain himself. Halfway through the banquet, Su Pei got up to change his clothes. After changing, Su Pei prepared to return to the banquet. "My lord, I am the assistant general under Captain Xie's command. I have an important matter to report to my lord." Su Pei frowned. When he heard the identity of the person, he waved his hand to dismiss the guards and called the assistant general forward. "What is it that you can't say at the banquet? Why must you talk about it in private?" Chapter 1151. Su Bei's indifferent attitude changed upon hearing this. His face darkened and his eyes darkened. A mere deputy general dared to insult Han Yu in front of him. Who gave him the courage? Su Bei thought to himself, but his expression did not change. He said, "Wenbin has always been generous. Why would he bear a grudge? If what you say is reasonable, he will accept it humbly." These were Su Bei's heartfelt words. Although Han Yu was stubborn and occasionally offended him, he was truly loyal to him. Who wouldn't like a loyal remonstrant who had never formed a clique? The deputy general's heart skipped a beat. Su Bei's words clearly showed that he trusted Han Yu. He had taken the risk to snitch to Su Bei. This action had offended Han Yu to the core. If even the Lord did not believe him, wouldn't he be ruining his future? Now that the arrow was knocked on the bowstring, it had to be released. His back was drenched in sweat as he braced himself and revealed everything he knew. The deputy general said, "I know I am guilty. It is unbecoming of a gentleman to talk behind someone's back. However, military advisor Han monopolizes military power and is arrogant. He has changed military orders several times, causing delays in battle. Now he is even shamelessly claiming credit and deceiving the Lord. How can I betray my loyalty and pretend not to know?" Su Bei was suspicious when he heard this. Although Han Yu had a straightforward personality and offended people easily, none of the civil and military officials in the tent had ever criticized Han Yu in this aspect. At most, they would say that Han Yu had a bad temper and was overbearing. However, this was not a major problem. "What do you mean by that? If there is no evidence, then this is a false accusation." Su Bei's voice deepened. His eyes carried a hint of fierceness as he stared at the deputy general. The deputy general steeled his heart and said, "Military advisor Han let Lu Shi go. Isn't this a major crime?" Su Bei almost choked on his own saliva. He could not be blamed for losing his composure. The deputy general's words were too shocking. What did he mean by Han Yu let Lu Shi go? Lu Shi was in the midst of an army of tens of thousands. How could Han Yu let her go? Tell me in detail. What exactly happened? The deputy general had already taken a gamble. He had already prepared for the worst. He did not expect Su Bei to not blame him and instead ask him about it. Seeing this, the deputy general knew that there was hope. He said, "Although military advisor Han has some weapons, the commander of the entire army is Commandant Xie." The deputy general was about to say that Han Yu was bossing Xie Zhe around, monopolizing military power, and complaining about the injustice done to his own general. However, Su Bei was not in the mood to listen. "Tell me why Wenbin let Lu Shi go first. Put the rest aside for now." The deputy general felt wronged and swallowed the rest of the words back into his stomach. He said concisely, "Yang Si and the others should have been buried in Gushu." Unexpectedly, military counselor Han made a mistake in his command, giving the thieves a chance to linger on. After that, their reinforcements arrived, and General Han retreated without a fight. If that's the case, I have the right to act as the military advisor when he saw that the situation wasn't looking good and promptly stopped the losses. But the military advisor had already recognized that the leader of the reinforcements was Lu Shi. Su Bei felt that this was a joke. Lu Shi had personally led troops and rushed over from afar to save Yang Si and the others? This must be fake, right? This was what Su Bei was thinking, but the deputy general's expression was not fake. For a moment, his heart wavered. Lu Shi's martial prowess is indeed extraordinary, and her temperament is restless. It is possible that she will personally take action. The deputy general could not help but interrupt Su Bei's words. He said, "Lu Shi's reinforcements are less than 3,000, and the remnants of Yang Si and the others have either escaped or are injured. Our army still has 20,000 troops. Why can't we fight? Without thinking, military counselor Han changed the military order and forced Colonel Xie to order a retreat. My lord, military counselor Han has missed a great opportunity. His intentions are unforgivable. If we can exchange for Lu Shi's head, I believe that these 20,000 soldiers will definitely not feel pity for themselves. For my lord, even if they have to sacrifice their lives, they will let Lu Shi stay. But military counselor Han ordered a retreat. At this point, the deputy general felt wronged and his eyes reddened. He was truly loyal to Su Bei and Xie. If he could exchange 20,000 lives for Jiang Pingji's head, he was willing to do it. Because he was very clear that if he did not do it now, he would have to pay with even more casualties in the future. Su Bei looked calm on the surface, but his heart was in turmoil. He said to the deputy general, "Tell me everything you know. Don't hide anything." The deputy general was overjoyed and hurriedly said, "Yes." Su Bei took a long time to change his clothes this time. Han Yu was worried that he had met with an accident and became the second Wuma Shang. He was about to send someone to ask when Su Bei rushed back. By then the banquet was more than half over. Everyone had drunk 3 rounds of wine and was tipsy. Han Yu noticed that Su Bei's face was a little gloomy. He thought to himself, is there any bad news? Thinking about the current situation, Han Yu frowned deeply. Worry was written all over his face. Wenbin, are you troubled by something? Qing Yuan looked away from the performance and turned his gaze to Han Yu, who was not in the right mood. During the period when Han Yu had led the troops to pursue Yangtze, Su Bei had put Qing Yuan in an important position. Therefore, Qing Yuan's seat at the banquet was closer to the front. It's just a few matters. The banquet was not a place to discuss matters. Han Yu could only vaguely refer to it. Qing Yuan understood, but he believed in his lord's strength. She might not lose to Jiang Pingji. How can Lu Shi and his kind be mentioned in the same breath as my lord? Even if they have a moment of glory, in the end, they will be like a shooting star in the night sky, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Just like her humble family, which had no foundation, they would eventually be annihilated along with the chaos of the world. Han Yu did not comment. He was too lazy to correct Qing Yuan's stubborn thoughts. While Qing Yuan was frantically cheering for his lord, Su Bei's gaze wandered to Han Yu. A strange look flashed in his eyes. He trusted Han Yu, but the deputy general's words made him feel very uncomfortable. Han Yu had 20,000 troops under his command. How could he not defeat a few thousand defeated soldiers? Knowing that the enemy's vassals were right in front of their formation, Han Yu did not think about killing them. Instead, he gave such a ridiculous order to retreat. Su Bei knew how terrifying Jiang Pingji's combat power was, but it was difficult for one person to fight against 4/5 of a group. No matter how powerful a person was, an army of 20,000 using the tactic of head-on fighting against him would always be able to kill him. As long as Jiang Pingji could die, so what if the 20,000 soldiers were sacrificed? To put it more bluntly, so what if Han Yu himself was sacrificed? Was it not worth it? Jiang Pingji was still single. She did not have any heirs to carry on her will. If she died, the forces in Wanzhou that had gathered together because of her would collapse. Even if Lu Shi was still around, he had retired for many years and had long stopped caring about the affairs of the world. Even if he came back, what use would he be? Why did Han Yu let go of such a good opportunity? Su Bei had also thought about it. Perhaps Han Yu had his own considerations. But could these considerations be worth the lives of the enemy's vassals? After the banquet, Han Yu went to see Su Bei in private. Han Yu wanted to talk about this matter. As a member of the aristocratic family, Su Bei did not show any signs of dissatisfaction on the surface, even though he was dissatisfied. Chapter 1152. Su Bei had intended to use the art of checks and balances to promote others to divide the power in Han Yu's hands. Han Yu had no objection to this. After all, extreme prosperity leads to decline. If he was placed in too much of an important position, Su Bei would question and be wary of him sooner or later. On the other hand, this could also provide opportunities for talented people to cultivate more useful people for the Lord. The prosperity of a force couldn't depend on one person. It needed 100 flowers to bloom together. Han Yu wasn't an autocratic person. Su Bei intended to check and balance the power, so he took the opportunity to give others opportunities. It was the best of both worlds. Late one night, an unexpected person climbed over the wall of his house. Han Yu looked at Xie, who was dressed in black, speechless. Why couldn't you talk about it during the day in the government office? Why did you have to climb over his wall in the middle of the night? He tightened the cloak on his shoulders with a bronze lamp in his right hand. Han Yu changed his clothes and returned to his room in the middle of the night. He was almost scared to death when he saw a dark shadow squatting outside his door. What is Commandant Xie doing? Han Yu smiled bitterly. If it weren't for the fact that he had a good personal relationship with Xie, he would have called the guards to beat Xie out of the room. While observing Xie's hesitant expression, he raised his hand and pushed the door open. He couldn't help but laugh. Commandant Xie, you'd better go inside and talk. If the night patrol sees us, I don't know what kind of rumors will spread the next day. Han Yu lit up the lamp. The room was brighter under the illumination of the lamp. Xie followed him into the room. Han Yu teased him when he saw that he didn't speak. All the soldiers in the army say that Commandant Xie is an upright man. Who would have thought that you have the hobby of a gentleman on a beam, climbing over someone's wall in the middle of the night? Xie's cheeks turned red from the teasing and he stuttered. He didn't know what to say. In the end he knelt down and apologized. Han Yu was shocked and quickly helped him up. Commandant Xie, please get up. What are you doing? Xie said, Military counselor, I didn't manage properly. I let the assistant general take advantage of the loophole and slandered the Lord. Han Yu was confused. Why did you say that? Xie was so ashamed that he refused to get up. He stammered out the whole story. Xie wouldn't have known that his deputy had stabbed Han Yu in the back, if it wasn't for the fact that his deputy had spilled the beans and badmouthed Han Yu in front of him. Every word that the deputy general had said to Su Bei had pierced through his heart. Xie suddenly understood when he thought of his lord's attitude toward Han Yu. This was not the tacit understanding between the lord and Han Yu at all. It was obvious that the lord was really dissatisfied. She might even be suspicious. As Xie continued, the smile on Han Yu's face gradually faded away. What was left was a chilling coldness. There seemed to be an undercurrent of coldness in his eyes. Counselor, Xie was interrupted by Han Yu. Forget it, I already know about this matter. Thank you for coming so late at night to inform me. Han Yu's voice wasn't as clear and bright as usual. Instead, it carried a chill that made people's hair stand on end. He seemed to be brewing something. Xie opened his mouth, unable to utter a single word. Han Yu paused and said, I plan to stay at home for a few days. I won't be seeing any guests. If there's nothing important, please don't come to visit. Xie was the most important general under Su Bei's command. He held military power in his hands. If he got too close to Han Yu, neither of them would be in a good position. Han Yu lowered his eyelids to hide the thoughts in his eyes. Xie couldn't help but want to put in a good word for Su Bei to ease the tense relationship between Su Bei and Han Yu. Before he could open his mouth, Han Yu laughed and said, You don't have to be so cautious, Lieutenant Xie. I know what I'm doing. Su Bei was the lord that he had personally chosen. How could he be disappointed in Su Bei just because of a moment of suspicion? It would be abnormal if there were no stumbles between the lord and his subordinate. After Xie left, the smile on Han Yu's face returned to normal. He sat in front of the table and watched the flickering candlelight. There was an undercurrent in his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. After a long while, Han Yu let out a long sigh, blew out the candlelight and went to sleep. Now that the great battle was imminent, no matter how afraid Su Bei was, he would not truly touch him. He could use this time to dispel his opponent's worries. Jiang Pingji led the troops to rush to Yang Xi's aid. Within a few days, the main army also hurried over and successfully joined forces with Jiang Pingji. Yang Xi, who was holed up in the tent, heard that the army had arrived. He hurriedly kicked away the thin blanket covering his body and angrily looked for Qiguan Rang to settle the score. Since his martial strength was not enough, he called Qin Gong over. Qin Gong was also an injured soldier, but he practiced martial arts all year round and had a strong body. His injuries were heavier than Yang Xi's, but he recovered much faster than Yang Xi. Advisor Yang. Wait a moment. Where are you going? Yang Xi stopped in his tracks and said with a fierce expression, Of course I'm looking for the culprit, the one who put us in such a difficult situation. Qiguan Rang's declaration of war had really screwed him over. If not for his lord's timely arrival, he would have already gone to the King of Hell, drank Granny Meng's soup, and crossed the bridge of helplessness. The corpse was cold. Qin Gong was still a newbie and the forces of Wanzhou were unfamiliar to him. Who gave him the courage to diss the elders before even bowing to them? Was it Yang Xi? Isn't this very offensive? So be it, Yang Xi said, feeling wronged. I almost lost my life. Isn't this even more aggrieved? But advisor. Qin Gong was dragged away by Yang Xi. The patrolling soldiers saw the way the two of them were tugging at each other, and it attracted countless strange looks. The newbie Qin Gong was thin-skinned and he quickly blushed. If the Lord finds out, what should we do? Picking a fight for no reason and violating military discipline? Be careful that the Lord makes life difficult for him. Yang Si said, if the Lord finds out, then so be it. According to her temperament, it's good enough that she didn't add fuel to the fire. Qin Gong was speechless. He slandered the Lord behind her back and still acted very sloppy and normal. Such a non-mainstream relationship between the Lord and his minister was really an eye-opener for him. Yang Si said he would go to the door. He asked where Qiguan Rang's tent was and directly pulled Qin Gong over. Before entering the tent, he smelled the aroma of food. He opened the tent and happened to hear Qiguan Rang and Wei Xi chatting and laughing. Look, they're here. Qin Gong was speechless. Qiguan Rang and Wei Xi looked at the two people outside the tent. Seeing them enter, the former got up and bowed deeply to them. Yang Si saw this ostentatious display and felt very upset. Qiguan Rang had taken the initiative to apologize and admit defeat. He felt that his fist had landed on cotton, and all his grievances had dissipated. He simply gave himself a way out and said, I heard that Wen Zheng is holding a banquet. Can we welcome a couple of uninvited guests? Qiguan Rang smiled and said, You're most welcome. Qin Gong looked left and right, still a little confused. He really couldn't understand the tricks of the literati group. Yang Si held a soup spoon in his left hand and ate. Qin Gong also ate a meal. Wei Xi saw that he was frowning deeply as if troubled by something. He asked with a smile, What is Feng Jing worried about? Qin Gong saw that the person who asked was Wei Xi, a man who was more beautiful than a woman. He immediately blushed and casually made an excuse. It's nothing much, I'm just wondering. The march is tough and this dish looks, smells and tastes good. I wonder how military advisor Qiguan prepared it? Wei Xi smiled and said, In order to make amends to Jing Rong, Wen Zheng secretly promised me many good things. Qin Gong was speechless. Chapter 1153. Jiang Pingji heard about Qiguan Rang inviting Yang Si to a banquet to make amends. As the Lord, she had yet to say anything, but the audience had already excitedly opened their bets. Long Shui Shijiang, Qiguan Rang wants to bribe little Rongrong with just one meal? Naive, childish, and overestimating himself. At least 2 meals. Nianzuo Zuzidi, little Rongrong almost lost her life this time. 1 meal is definitely not enough. Yuxing Fan, the people above are all salted fish. No matter what, Yang Si is still a strategist. Have you ever seen a strategist change his stance for food? Some of the audience happily joined in the fun, while others were more realistic. Whether it was Yang Si or Qiguan Rang, they were both intelligent white and black people, not kindergarten kids. When kindergarten kids had a conflict, a lollipop could reconcile, and a big meal could make them as close as wearing a pair of pants. These two white and black people had a conflict. Who knows, they might be at each other's throats from now on. Of course, this was not what worried them the most. They were most worried that Qiguan Rang and Yang Si's discord would cause internal divisions in Wanzhou. The audience raised their heads in anticipation, eager to know the final outcome. Jiang Pingji was also quite curious. I heard that Wenjing asked Zixiao to cook yesterday? Jiang Pingji said with a smile, Zixiao's cooking skills are excellent. Jing Rong got lucky. Qiguan Rang waved his feather fan lightly. When he heard Jiang Pingji mention yesterday's incident, his calm eyes stirred up some waves. Zixiao's cooking skills are indeed good. Even the royal chef is slightly inferior. If Jing Rong knew that the person who cooked was Zixiao, I'm afraid she would stick to him. As they spoke, Jiang Pingji saw a bullet screen. Lungan Babao Kanji, didn't the ancients say that a gentleman should stay away from the kitchen? Even if Zixiao's cooking skills are really good, isn't it a deliberate provocation for Qiguan Rang to ask Zixiao to cook? He felt a little uncomfortable at the thought. It was as if Qiguan Rang was using Zixiao as a cook. According to the audience's understanding, Qiguan Rang's actions were inappropriate. However, he had really wronged Qiguan Rang. Inyue Zhuge Qin Ma. What does a gentleman should stay away from the kitchen have to do with cooking? If you want to say that it sounds hypocritical, I can understand. These words came from the Mencius. The original sentence was, a gentleman is like a beast. When he sees it alive, he cannot bear to see it die. When he hears its sound, he cannot bear to eat its flesh. This is why a gentleman keeps his distance from the kitchen. In layman's terms, not entering the kitchen was because one did not want to hear the screams of livestock. This was because one would not have the heart to eat or kill. It was not to say that a gentleman should not cook. However, with the evolution of society, many words have been deliberately twisted. For example, a woman's virtue is to have no talent. The original meaning has been twisted to the point that even his mother wouldn't recognize it. Be it a gentleman or a villain, they all had to eat. Otherwise they would have starved to death. Qiguan Rang privately asked Wei Ci, who had excellent culinary skills, to help him. He did not mean to look down on him. If it was really a humiliation, would Wei Ci foolishly agree? Qiguan Rang did not know about the existence of the bullet screen and said, "My lord's prediction is correct. Zixiao has been entangled." Jiang Pingji imagined the scene of Yang Si surrounding and intercepting Wei Ci in her mind. She could not help but laugh involuntarily. After a moment of silence, Jiang Pingji suddenly opened her mouth. "The blame for this disaster lies on me. This time Wenjing has been wronged. You have to take the blame for me." Jiang Pingji had asked for the declaration of war. Qiguan Rang had merely obeyed her orders. If one wanted to nitpick, the most one could say was that Qiguan Rang's declaration of war was too hurtful, causing Su Bei to fly into a rage out of humiliation. In this matter, Jiang Pingji and Yang Si each had 50% of the responsibility. Qiguan Rang was merely an innocent bystander. He did not do anything wrong, but he had to bear Yang Si's wrath. From Qiguan Rang's perspective, he felt rather wronged. If Qiguan Rang and Yang Si quarreled, Jiang Pingji would not blame them. She decisively admitted her mistake, causing Qiguan Rang to look at her in astonishment. According to the mainstream thinking of the ancient times, it was impossible for the Lord to be wrong. The only ones who were wrong were the officials. Taking Jiang Pingji's case as an example, she felt that she was wrong. However, from the perspective of Qiguan Rang and the others, this was not the case. As the conspirators, they did not discover the hidden dangers. They did not advise the Lord in time, causing her to make a mistake. Hence, the responsibility was on them. This logic was unreasonable in Jiang Pingji's eyes, but the others did not find anything wrong with it. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Do I look like the kind of person who will not admit to my crimes? Jiang Pingji teased him with a smile. She and Qiguan Rang were not only the Lord's officials but also good friends. They were quite casual when it did not involve official matters. She did not put on airs. "Do you want me to cook a meal for you personally?" Qiguan Rang lowered his eyelids and said faintly, "My lord said that she was wrong, but I am innocent. Why do you have to punish me?" Jiang Pingji did not react for a moment. She only reacted after a while. Qiguan Rang was mocking her for her poor cooking skills. Eating the food she cooked was like being punished. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Their friendship was over. The reaction of the audience in the streaming room was even more unbridled. They changed their ways to ridicule Qiguan Rang. At the same time, they called Qiguan Rang like crazy. These days it was rare to see a subordinate who dared to directly contradict his own boss. Tudu Feiqiu, Boss Qiguan does not have a strong presence, but he is a boss. His EQ is high. Lao Ciji Lianming, not only does Boss Qiguan have a high EQ, but he is also truly loyal to the streamer. If this happened to me, I would definitely be angry. Yang Si did not look for the culprit but attacked me instead. I'm not going to take the blame for this. Once things get out of hand, it will not just be a conflict between two strategists. It will even shake the streamer's power. For example, choosing sides, forming cliques, and so on. Boss Qiguan Rang must have known about this situation, so he took the initiative to take a step back. Yang Si also knew when to stop. Both of them took a step back. The world was clear. Everyone understood this simple logic. Which of the strategists was not a shrewd person? But it was not easy to take a step back. This concerned one's face and dignity. Many people knew that it was wrong to do so, but they would often be aggressive for their own interests. For the sake of the overall situation and internal harmony, Qiguan Rang decisively took a step back. From this, one could see his breadth of mind and foresight. The crisis that could have caused a conflict disappeared just like that. Only one person was very frustrated. Wei Ci was targeted by Yang Si. In order to avoid this glutton, Wei Ci could only escape to Jiang Pingji's place to hide. Such a glutton, sooner or later he will fall because of this. Jiang Pingji commented. Ever since Yang Si entered her camp, she had often commented on him like this. Wei Ci said, "Isn't that so? He doesn't learn his lesson in 2 lifetimes." Fortunately, Jiang Pingji had already turned off the streaming room. Otherwise, Wei Ci's words would have blown up the audience. Jiang Pingji had a smile in her eyes. She asked casually, "Why? Jing Rong has fallen because of this before?" Chapter 1154. Zuda? Jiang Pingji searched in her mind before she could match the person. "The Zuda you mentioned, is it Tang Yao?" Jiang Pingji was not very interested in Wei Si's past life. She rarely took the initiative to ask about it, unless she was bored and wanted to listen to stories to kill time. Tang Yao and Jing Rong don't seem to have any interactions? Why are they fighting each other? In their previous lives, Zuda and Jing Rong were both Huangsong officials. Zuda was born in an aristocratic family, so he attached great importance to his family status. Jing Rong was born in a poor family, but Huangsong put her in an important position. Of course the two of them didn't get along. The discord between them ran deep. Wei Si knew Jiang Pingji's temperament. Telling her these things would not affect her trust in Yang Si. Her Majesty took the initiative to befriend Jing Rong and frequently gifted her with delicious food and delicacies. At first it was nothing, but as time went on, Yang Si and Huangsong grew apart. After that, he used several successive stratagems to sow discord. Jing Rong had no choice but to seek refuge with His Majesty. Yang Si did not jump ship because of his gluttony, but the cause of his jump ship was indeed because of his gluttony. In his previous life, if it weren't for Tang Yao's godly assistance, the possibility of Yang Si taking the initiative to jump ship wasn't high. Jiang Pingji listened with great interest. She did not forget to mock him. "I'm afraid that Jing Rong is going to regret his actions. If it's recorded in the history books, the future generations will know that he made a mistake because of his gluttony. This reason was really shameful." She could totally imagine what the students of later generations would call Yang Si, foodie. Wei Si pursed his lips and smiled. Wasn't that right? In his previous life, Yang Si had often hugged him and poured out his grievances. This dark history was simply an unspeakable pain in life. Jiang Pingji asked again, "What about Tang Yao?" Wei Si lowered his eyelids and said lightly, "After Huangsong was defeated, he committed suicide." He wasn't lying, but he wasn't completely lying either. Under Huangsong's command, Tang Yao often gave Yang Si a hard time. The two of them were always at loggerheads with each other. Tang Yao even used the excuse of being drunk to point at the mulberry tree and scold the locust tree that Yang Si was the son of a prostitute. Yang Si endured the humiliation. Later, when Huangsong was defeated, he returned the humiliation to Tang Yao. In the end, Tang Yao could not bear the humiliation and was forced by Yang Si to commit suicide by hitting the wall. It couldn't be said that Yang Si was wrong in this matter, but his means of revenge were indeed somewhat vicious. Wei Si did not want his lord to be dissatisfied with Yang Si because of this. Jiang Pingji did not question further. Tang Yao should be compiling books with Master Yuanjing now, right? Wei Si said, "This is more suitable for him. It's also safe for him." The world was in chaos and the feudal lords were in internal strife. It was either you die or I live. With Tang Yao's temperament he would be fine under any lord, but he was indeed not suitable for Jiang Pingji. The pride of an aristocratic family had long since melted into his bones and was deeply rooted. It wasn't something that could be corrected with just a few words. Rather than letting him come into contact with power and provoke discord among the forces in Wanzhou, it was better to let him make the best use of him and follow the teacher in writing books. Not to mention anything else, Tang Yao's knowledge and literary talent were truly impeccable. "You're right. Writing books is more suitable for him." Jiang Pingji furrowed her brows. She was short of manpower at the moment, but she would rather have none than have a substandard one. Tang Yao was indeed talented, but he was indeed not suitable for her at the moment. He won't quit while he's ahead like Jing Rong, and he won't take the initiative to give in like Wen Zheng. The biggest possibility was that he would argue for what was right and put everyone on the spot. Jiang Pingji and Su Bei had completely shed all pretense of cordiality. After Gusu Gorge, she had Qiguan Rang write a declaration of war. The previous declaration of war was a public condemnation, but this one was an official declaration of war. When Su Bei received the declaration of war, he flew into a rage. He immediately sent someone to write a declaration of war to scold them. It was a joyous scolding battle. As the conflict of public opinion escalated, the smell of gunpowder between the two parties became more and more intense. Su Bei followed Han Yu's previous suggestion and mobilized his troops in preparation for war. Jiang Pingji was not to be outdone. She occupied the Sichuan plains to train her troops, and at the same time she ordered the rear to transport more weapons and rations. At this juncture Su Bei played a trick in private. He sent a messenger to Huang Song's side to persuade him, preparing to form an alliance with Huang Song to resist Jiang Pingji. This suggestion was jointly proposed by Han Yu and Cheng Sun. The officials in the tent all agreed. Although they didn't want to admit it, compared to Jiang Pingji, Su Bei's military strength was indeed inferior. Everyone knew that once Su Bei fell, Jiang Pingji's next target would be Huang Song. The two of them had a mutually dependent relationship. No matter what schemes Huang Song had in mind, he couldn't remain indifferent. Huang Song quickly replied and formed an alliance in private. To express his sincerity, Huang Song even sent a very special woman to Su Bei. Su Bei was speechless. Did he seem like such a lecherous person? Su Bei was born in the Su family. What kind of woman couldn't he get? Why did he have to play with a married woman? Yes, Huang Song had sent him a woman who had turned over a new leaf. This woman had married 4 husbands and caused the death of 4 of them. When Su Bei heard about this, he was so angry that he almost exploded. Was Huang Song trying to form an alliance, or was he playing a prank on him? Until he read Huang Song's reply. Is this true? Su Bei furrowed his brows. Can we really use this woman to drive a wedge between Yang Si and Lu Shi? The skinny woman knelt on the ground. Beside her knelt a thin and weak little boy. According to Huang Song's letter, this woman had a history with Yang Si. The little boy beside her was Yang Si's only child. In the Battle of Tsang Prefecture, Jiang Pingji and Huang Song had peacefully divided the 2 counties of Tsang Prefecture and Qinzhou. The 2 counties of Tsang Prefecture belonged to Jiang Pingji, while Qinzhou belonged to Huang Song. Qinzhou happened to be Yang Si's hometown. Not long ago, this woman had been arrested by her neighbors and sent to the magistrate's office for killing her husband. According to the law, she should have been beheaded in public. However, she mentioned Yang Si, and this case was handed over to Huang Song. After a round of investigation and interrogation, the woman confessed that she and Yang Si had a past when they were young. Huang Song had been tricked by Yang Si so many times that he hated him to the core. When he heard the woman's words, he immediately paid attention and sent people to investigate. Yang Si's hometown was in Qinzhou's Jiangding County. This matched the woman's testimony. What they found later also matched the woman's testimony. This woman had killed her 4th husband because he had beaten her son. Huang Song's intuition told him that he could make a fuss about this. However, he didn't dare to agree with Yang Si's taste. Yang Si was the son of a prostitute, yet he had impregnated another prostitute and had given birth to a son. Huang Song said to the woman, I heard that Jing Rong is still unmarried and has a very pitiful life. He will definitely bring you and your daughter back and treat you well. The woman shrunk her shoulders and hung her head low. She looked timid, but when she heard Huang Song's words, her eyes lit up. Her eyes were filled with greed. Huang Song was very satisfied. He handed the woman and the child over to Su Bei's messenger. How Su Bei operated was none of his business. Yang Si used his own experience to illustrate a saying, a man sits in his tent and a pot falls from the sky. When the 2 armies started the war, they first probed the enemy on a small scale. Jiang Pingji ordered Qin Gong and Yang Si to lead 20,000 troops to Longshui in Shanghai County. This was the place where Sichuan Plain and Shanweng Town bordered each other. They would hold back a portion of Su Bei's troops. Another 30,000 troops were dispatched to launch a probing attack on Zhe County to find out the enemy's strength. The remaining troops were to stay behind and wait for the situation to change. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.